Hello everyone. I am your dark narrator here to guide you today. I know many of you use this video to help you drift off to sleep, but before you do, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also drop a comment letting us know where you're from and what time you're watching. Now settle in, get comfortable and relax. I used to get sick all the time when I was a kid. Nothing major, just your usual stuff. Little fevers, stomach aches, that kind of thing. But my mama couldn't bear to see me so miserable. So whenever I was sick, she would tell me my favorite story. This story. Once upon a time there was a little glass princess. Her hands were glass, her feet were glass, the tip of her nose and the tips of her toes were all glass. She sparkled in the light when she danced. She was the most beautiful princess in the whole world, but glass is fragile. It cracks and it breaks. So the little princess couldn't live in the outside like the rest of the world. Instead, she lived in a snow globe and spent her days twirling in the silvery flakes. One day she became curious about the world outside her glass chamber. She wanted to breathe the fresh air, to feel the grass under her cold feet. So she escaped her snow globe and went in search of great adventures. But the little glass princess didn't know about the dangers of the world. No sooner than she left her globe, she slipped and fell from a great height, shattering into pieces on the hardwood floor beneath. And the little glass princess was no more. I can't explain why I liked that story so much. It's a sad story, no doubt, but I was always fascinated by the glass princess. I like to imagine her pirouetting in the snow, the light gleaming in shattered beams through her glass skin. How beautiful she must have looked. My mama was not a terrible woman or a monster. She didn't hurt me. There are no scars on my body, no mars to my flesh. She always held me as something precious to be treated with extreme delicacy and tenderness. It was her love for me, though that's not what the doctors say. But what can doctors know? Since I was brought here, they've done nothing. They only look at me with sadness and pity and all kinds of ugly emotions in their eyes. They don't love me. Only Mama loved me. Mama. I still remember the day she didn't come to see me. Mama had never done that before. I would have gone looking for her, but how could I? I don't leave my room. Well, I didn't anyway before this whole mess started. My room was my life, and it was a good life. It had no windows, but it was always bright. Mama had filled the room with lamps and lights of all different kinds. She liked the light, and I did too. Of course, it always seemed brighter when she was in the room with me. That first day she didn't come, I was sad. The second day I cried. The third day there was a knock on my door, and the doctors came to take me away. I miss Mama. The doctors want me to write about what it was like living with Mama, what we like to do together, our favorite foods, our favorite songs. They say that if I do a good job, they'll let me see her, but I know that's not true. My time with Mama was special. Some days she spent hours with me. Some days we only had a few minutes together, but every moment was precious to us. She liked to sing to me, strange songs I didn't understand about ghosts and love. They were good songs. She liked to brush my hair too. I have long blonde hair, and sometimes we would sit for hours as she brushed it, always gentle. Sometimes, though, Mama would go to her away place and forget what she was doing. Once she brushed out half my hair before she remembered to stop. Sometimes Mama would get real sick. She'd get pale and tired, and her belly would swell up, big and round. Once I asked her what was wrong. She said there was a ghost in her stomach, wailing and clawing and trying to get out. I was scared, but she told me it was okay. She told me it would leave and then she'd be happy again. She was right, of course. Mama was always right. One day she'd come back and the swelling would be all gone. She'd be happy then and say that the ghost had run away. To celebrate, she'd make all my favorite foods. We'd have spaghetti and meatballs and hamburgers and lasagna. Mama was the best cook around. I wonder if Mama can still cook in heaven. They think I don't hear them, but I do. The night they brought me in, they told me Mama would be coming to see me in a few days. But after they thought I was asleep, the nurses started whispering. They said things like smell and hanging and tongue and dead. Mama isn't coming to see me. Sometimes I pretend to be asleep when the doctors come in. They say things like sick and unstable and sad. Jokes on them because I already know I'm sick. Before Mama let them take me away, I started getting sick. Sometimes I can't stop from shaking. I get bad headaches and soreness all over my body. Sometimes my arms are so stiff they're hard to bend. It made Mama sad and scared. Maybe that's why Mama left. Yesterday, the doctors asked about my brothers and sisters. I don't have any, I said. They told me Mama had other children, but they couldn't find them. I told them they were wrong. I'm Mama's only little girl. That made them scared. They use the word pregnant a lot, but I don't know what that means. Thinking of Mama having other children made me jealous. Mama is mine. I wish she'd come back for me. I'm getting sicker. I wish Mama were here to tell me my story. I asked the doctors to tell the story of the glass princess, but they said they don't know it. Oh well, they couldn't tell it half as well as Mama anyway. It's hard to write this now, the way my hands shake. The doctors told me that I'm not getting better. They used the word comfortable a lot. They want me to be comfortable. Last night I heard them talking again. I stayed very still so they didn't know I was awake, listening. They said flesh and eat and kuru. I wonder what that means. They say I'll see Mama soon. I think I will too. Maybe then she can tell me the story. I just want to be Mama's glass princess again. I miss you. I held off on getting a cell phone for as long as possible. I didn't really have a good reason, I guess, other than the cost. When I was just setting out on my own, there was no way I could afford the monthly plan. I was the only one of my friends to still rely on a landline, and it drove everyone nuts. I managed to wait until my 25th birthday, when I finally felt financially secure enough to justify buying one for myself. My friends all laughed about my change of heart, but I could tell they were relieved. To be honest, I was pretty pleased too. As it turns out, cell phones are ridiculously convenient. Who knew? I didn't start getting the texts until about a month after I bought my phone. It was the first message from an unknown number that I'd received, and it read simply, "I miss you." I was confused at first. What kind of introductory text was that? It seemed a little overdramatic to me. And that was when I made the connection. About a year before, I dumped a deadbeat ex-boyfriend out of my life. Looking back, I can definitively say that he was really something of an overgrown child. He expected me to cook, clean, set up his doctor's appointments, and give him, yes, give him, half of my income each month, as he did not find it necessary to get a job. I shouldn't have stayed with him so long. Damn those devilish good looks. But once I came to my senses, I kicked him to the curb, as all his other girlfriend's victims had done before. My guess was that he'd stalked my Facebook or prodded my friends for my new number. After all, this wasn't the first time he'd tried to reach out to me, and I figured it wouldn't be the last. In the end, I chose not to answer. For one, I knew he would just try to manipulate me if I gave him the chance, as per usual. For two, it would give me petty satisfaction to let him feel ignored and unheard. Now, as a rule, I try not to be petty, but sometimes such a perfect opportunity is just too seductive. The next few months seemed to corroborate my inference. His attacks weren't constant, but were always vague pleas that seemed to indicate that he needed a new host to leech off and couldn't find one. It was unsurprising that he'd try to reach out to me first, as I'd been the most loyal and long-lasting of all his girlfriends, and the most naive. I was the perfect target. The messages were always in the same vein and quickly became tiresome. "I miss you. I wish I could see you. I thought I saw you in a crowd today, but it turned out to just be a dream." Ugh, pathetic. One night, about 8 months since I'd had my phone, I slipped up. I have to admit, I'd been drinking. It had started as one beer to help me unwind after work and quickly snowballed into a one-woman party. I was thoroughly smashed when I received a much longer text than usual. "I miss you so much. I know you don't read these, but today of all days I need you to know how much I love you. I'd do anything to see you one more time." Today of all days, I wondered. I tried to wade through the mushy haze of my brain. The first thought I had, I seized. Today must have been our anniversary. Sure, why not? It would be the perfect opportunity for a little manipulation. He was a prick, but he was smart. And then I had an idea. He wants to play games? Okay, let's play. But I'm going to change the rules. I swear my thoughts slurred. I began to type, and my autocorrect struggled to clarify through my drunkenness. "If you want to come see me, then why don't you do it?" And then, just for good measure, I let him know that I knew he'd been investigating me. "You know where to find me." I sent it, and with that, I changed fate. When I woke up the next morning, I had 13 missed calls. I tried to remember, through the throbbing of my skull, just what bullshit I'd done the night before. I groaned when my texting history answered my question. Well, at least I hadn't answered the phone, I thought. I silently prayed that he wouldn't message or call again, but I feared that I'd merely succeeded in egging him on. To my great relief, he stopped messaging me. For a week or so, my phone was blissfully free from his assaults. I was secretly satisfied, congratulating my drunken self on her ingenuity. The next week, I received a knock on my door. I opened it only to reveal a man of the badge, his solemn face and blue uniform standing stark in the morning sunlight. His partner stood behind him, his face hard as stone. I felt a strange coldness seeping into my veins as they stared at me. Good morning, officers. Is something wrong?" I asked. With very little introduction, they invited themselves inside. I let them in, not sure what they were looking for, but positive they wouldn't find it. I figured they'd made a mistake, and was even more surprised when they began firing questions. "Do you know anyone by the name of Silence Madison?" I was stumped, completely puzzled. "I can't say that I do." "Why?" "We found a series of texts to you on her phone. We found only one reply from you." The younger officer pulled out a printout of the text that I'd been receiving, along with my one drunken reply. Reality started to dawn on me as the older officer asked, "Did you receive these messages?" "Yeah," I answered. I added quickly, "But they were coming from an unknown number. I thought they were from my ex-boyfriend." "And that's why you sent that reply?" I was sweating nervously. "Well, yeah. I thought it would make him stop." I couldn't stop running my mouth. I was a little drunk, so maybe it wasn't the best decision. The younger officer stepped outside as the older one sighed. "There seems to have been a rather unfortunate accident." "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath and opened his mouth. Silence had had a very rough first year of college. Classes were hard. She didn't quite fit in. Her life was a mess of stress and papers. And just when she thought it couldn't get any worse, her best friend since childhood, Raquel Wagner, died in a car wreck. The death was instant, but Silence's pain was not. She'd withdrawn into herself as the semester went on. Her family and friends mourned Raquel's loss, of course, but they continued their lives as people are wont to do. Silence, on the other hand, could not bring herself to leave her friend in the past. She tried to deal with it. She really did. She looked for outlets. She tried to put on a happy face when she went to class. But she sank slowly into a darkness that felt inescapable. And when that darkness was truly thick, suffocating, insufferable, she'd text Raquel's old number. A useless gesture, but sometimes it would bring her comfort. And on the anniversary of Raquel's death, when she was at her lowest, she finally got a response. "If you want to come see me, then why don't you do it? You know where to find me." She'd tried calling, but she didn't even reach voicemail because I had never set it up. So she'd done the only logical thing she could do. She'd reached for the box cutter she'd swiped from work and opened her veins to the possibility of infinity. I made a terrible mistake that night, a mistake that ended the life of someone desperately struggling just above the surface. Her father forgave me, but no matter how many times I apologized, her mother had nothing but hatred for me. I understood that. To her, I had been the final push to kill her daughter. The police told me over and over that Silence herself had ended her own life. I was not to blame. But inside me, the seeds of guilt spread far across my heart, growing like weeds that I just couldn't uproot. It was a long, hard year. I managed to get back on my feet and continue on with my life, although Silence's death hung over me like a shadow. No matter what I did, I just couldn't forget her, no matter how far away the incident seemed. Yesterday was her anniversary. I tried my best to get through the day, pretending I'd never heard that name, never heard that story. It was going well until about 10 that night when I received a text. A text from a number I'd been trying desperately to forget for the entirety of the last year. "Thank you." Running a library is not an easy thing to do. You'd be surprised at the number of people who think that all librarians do is sit around and read the whole day. They have no concept of all the duties that come with being a librarian. In just one day, my mother will teach a class for senior citizens on how to use the computer, help 4 different families find the graves of their loved ones, register 1,000 new books into the system, reorder all the books that have been returned, hold a story time session for the children. The list goes on and on. The point of me telling you this is for you to understand that it takes a person with a degree and years of experience to run a library. And I am not that person. My mom has run our small town's library for over 20 years. She's damn good at what she does, and that's the only reason that town still has a library. Unfortunately, this meant that it was difficult to replace her, even for a short amount of time when she fell down the basement stairs and broke her leg. I should have suspected something was up when she called me home. I'm a freelance writer, so it's not difficult for me to come back to rural Minnesota at a moment's notice. You'll understand, however, that I don't do it very often. I rarely have any shred of desire to return to my hometown. I need you to watch over the library for me until I can go back to work. When my mom said that, it wasn't a request so much as an order. It was easy to tell from the set look in her eyes that she had already mentally decided I would be taking over for her, regardless of any request of mine. As the librarian's daughter, I knew better than anyone how difficult her job is. I blanched when she asked me and said, "Mom, there's no way. I don't know how to register books. I don't know how to use the system." My mom waved her hand dismissively. "That's not a problem. You won't have to register any books. You can just check them out, which you've done before. Another librarian from Rock County will be coming once a week to register any new books and fix anything you might have screwed up." I wanted to scowl at that, but I held back, mostly because it was true. For the most part, I need you to deal with patrons. Help them find books, help them with research, keep the computers up and running. You do realize you're asking me to do the impossible, right? I deadpanned. My mom sighed. "Look, I know this isn't ideal, but it's only for a few weeks until my leg is better. I just need you to keep things afloat. You know, if there was anyone qualified to do this, I'd ask them. As it is, you're the closest to a qualified librarian this town has, aside from me. You've grown up with the library, and you know the basics of how it works. You can do this." I gave my mom a skeptical look, but she just returned it with an encouraging smile. I sighed as she began to give me a rundown on my duties as her stand-in. There were so many details I actually had to take notes. By the 4th or 5th page, I was convinced that she was setting me up for failure. "Just do your best, you'll be fine," she said. Yeah, right. The first day at the library was utter and complete hell, mixed in with some chaos and a healthy dose of self-loathing. I followed my mom's instructions to the letter, but even that was a paltry comfort. Make sure you have story time in the morning. It starts promptly at 9 a.m. Usually I love kids, but not when I'm the one who has to try to keep them in line. And they never stop talking. It took me 15 minutes to get to the 4th page of the stupid picture book I'd picked out, something about a dumb jellyfish that lost his glasses. Jellyfish don't even need glasses, you little shits. Try to run a virus scan on each computer before noon. If one computer goes down, the rest are sure to follow. Trust me. Of course, it would be my luck that the computers would all crash on my first day. I called the resident IT guy, a man from across the county who proved to be distinctly unhelpful. "I can probably get in to fix them later this week," he said. "Oh, perfect. Computerless for a week." I don't remember what exactly I said to him, but apparently my threats were frightening enough to get him in within the hour. He carefully avoided me as he fixed the computers. Some patrons might need help with genealogy research. Just do the best you can. Even with the websites my mom provided, it was near impossible to find these people. My great-great-grandmother's name was Ethel. Can you find her for me? I can try. What's her last name? Oh, I'm not sure, but I know she lived in a red house. I see. Any other information? She was a witch. I'm trying to find her spell book. Right. Some kids will probably be coming in to find books for school. They have a reading program in school, and they have to earn a certain number of points in a semester by reading books in their reading level. Make sure to get them books appropriate for both their age and reading level. "What do you mean my son shouldn't read A Clockwork Orange?" screamed the soccer mom, her long manicured nails tapping on the library desk. Her 8-year-old son stood a little ways away, browsing the sports books. "It's just not age-appropriate, ma'am. I'll have you know my son is damn smart and he can read whatever he wants. Ma'am, about half of this book is about rape, and the other half is about murder," I said, losing patience. "What?" she shrieked, throwing the book down on the counter in disgust. "Why on earth would the school recommend such filth? And why do you offer it here? Really, I expect more from a public institution like this." So like I said, that first day was exceptionally long and brutal. The days after weren't much better. There were a few odd instructions that my mom had given me before sending me on my doomed mission. They were so strange, in fact, that I asked the hospital if they'd checked my mom for a concussion. because she was obviously talking nonsense. She had to be. Every night after you lock up, go down to the library basement. Make sure to take along a book of your choice. It can be anything. Then you'll need to sit down there and read aloud for at least half an hour. I blinked as I stared at my mom, giving me a stern look from her hospital bed. Am I supposed to record this, or? No, don't worry about that. Just go down there and read. Mom, there's nothing down there. It was true. The basement was a decrepit dust fest, complete with a bare concrete floor and rows of useless crap that had never been thrown away for some odd reason or another. It doesn't matter if there is or isn't anything down there. You just do as I said. Understand? She was rarely so harsh with me, so I agreed, making a big show of writing it down. She relaxed. Make sure you lock the doors before you leave, but leave one light on, the one by the front desk. If you remember, leave some candy behind, too. She must have seen the look I was giving her, because she said, I know this all seems like an odd thing to ask, but it's very important to me, all right? I couldn't say I was sure that my mother was completely sane, or that she hadn't conked her head hard enough to drive logic out the window. But she was looking at me as though this was the most important part of my job, so I gave a resigned nod and said, all right. The practice, however, was much easier than the theory, mostly because I really fucking hated going into that basement. The first night I went down, I grabbed my copy of Wuthering Heights, one of my favorite books, and descended the stairs, flicking on the light as I went. There was only one functioning light in the basement, a bare bulb hung from the ceiling that illuminated a tiny circular spot on the floor. I felt like I was stepping into the spotlight as I sat down in the chair my mother must have placed there. I sat in the total silence and cleared my throat. It was strange being down here alone. I really didn't like it, but I had a job to do, so I set a timer on my phone for 30 minutes and started reading. I stumbled a little at the beginning, the words jumbling together on their way out my mouth, but soon I had found my groove and the narrative flowed just fine, my voice carrying throughout the damp basement. It made me nervous the way I broke the silence. It seemed wrong. I could feel my pulse hammering hard in my throat, and I began to wish that I had just ignored my mother's instructions. I'm stupid. This is stupid. And I'm stupid for doing the stupid thing, stupid. As I kept reading, I gradually became aware of the feeling of somebody watching me. Of course I'd feel that way. I mean, I was sitting in this creepy old basement, all alone with barely even a light to keep me company. My voice echoing off the cement walls in total solitude. It's completely normal that I'd begin to feel creeped out, as though I wasn't really alone. Normal, but that didn't mean that I liked it. I was startled when my phone roared to life, its jingle signaling the end of my 30 minutes. Swallowing hard, I silenced the offending object and raced up the stairs, suddenly feeling that something was going to slither out and drag me back down if I wasn't careful. I slammed the basement door shut and ran through the library, finishing everything as quickly as I could. I left the light on over the front desk. I'd bought a candy bar during lunch, a Milky Way if you're curious, and I left it on the desk. It looked like an offering to something. I couldn't stop shaking. I ran out the front door and locked it, checking and rechecking to make sure that I hadn't made a mistake. I won't lie, I was relieved after locking it, as though the extra barrier between myself and the basement would save me from something. It took me a full 10 minutes before I was calm enough to climb into my car and drive to my parents' house, where my mom and dad had set up my old room for as long as I'd be running the library. Dad was at the hospital with Mom, who hadn't come home yet, so I had the house to myself. I got drunk that night, prying open my dad's liquor cabinet and drinking whatever I laid my eyes on. I threw on some stupid sitcom and sat in the living room, all the lights on and a blanket drawn around me like a suit of armor. So ended the absolute worst first day of a job I'd ever had. That first week was anything but easy. On Tuesday, I made a kid cry during story time. On Wednesday, I caught one of the patrons trying to watch porn on the computer. On Thursday, the town pervert came in specifically to harass me, and I had to threaten the police on him when he started bragging about his massive cock. On Friday, it rained and the roof leaked, ruining about a dozen good books that would have to be replaced. The one thing that got easier, at least, was the basement. At first, I'd been so confused as to why my mother had asked me to do all these strange rituals. It was like she was trying to assuage a spirit or something. The moment that thought occurred to me, I realized what was happening. My mother, you see, is a big believer in ghosts. The library has always had its share of bad luck, lights going out on their own, computers crashing, etc. and she must have started to believe that it had its own little haunting. Perhaps she thought that if she read to it, gave it offerings, things would go smoothly. After that, my nightly rituals actually became kind of fun. I started to imagine that the ghost my mom had been communicating with was another young woman just like me. I picked out books that I thought she might like, read as books that I liked, and put more feeling into my readings. Occasionally, I'd find myself talking to her absent-mindedly throughout the day. In the end, I even started believing she might actually be there. It started with the candy. As per my mother's request, I'd buy the elusive little spirit something as an offering. I started out with chocolate and I'd throw it away in the morning. One night, however, I left a bag of Skittles, and the next morning it was gone. I had scoured the library, looking for some sign of the candy, but it was just gone. From then on, I started buying all different kinds of treats, seeing if I could get different results. Chocolates were usually left behind, but hard candies were almost always gone by the next day. After about 3 weeks, I decided that, yes, there was a ghost, and I was beginning to understand its preferences. Maybe it seems that I'm being a little too cavalier about all this. After all, it's not every day that people decide they're dealing with ghosts and start messing around with them. Of course, you have to remember that I hadn't actually seen any ghosts. I just imagined that they must be there. To me, it was something of a game. I got to play make-believe, and some forces that be played along. It was fun, if a little strange. That all changed one night just after closing, when I made the mistake of letting down my guard. Everyone in town knew that the library closed at 8 p.m. on Thursdays, and that day was a Thursday. It was already 8:30, and I was choosing a book. I'd just about decided on Little Women, when I heard the bells above the door jingle and somebody step inside the library. Now, I hadn't locked the door yet because, well, I didn't think I needed to. I can already hear you guys telling me how stupid I am, but cut me a little slack. After all, it's a small town, and nothing ever happens in small towns, right? Guess again. I peered out from the bookshelf I was standing near and saw the town pervert walking towards me. He had this big shit-eating grin on his face, and immediately I was on high alert. Let me give you a quick rundown on how this guy looks. He's massive, and I don't mean fat. He's ridiculously tall with a fair amount of muscle bulging out of his ill-fitting and stained clothes. He lacked the capacity to understand personal hygiene, apparently, because his hair was always greasy and his breath smelled like the inside of a bat cave. He had a bad habit of getting inside a person's personal space and leering at them, his eyes traveling shamelessly over their body. It disgusted me. My mom had always warned me about this guy. We'll call him Chad for the sake of anonymity. See, Chad would try to fuck anything that moved, regardless of age or circumstance. He'd been around since I was a kid, and he had often tried to convince both me and my older sister to come into his house and talk with him. Just for a moment, he had something nice to give us. He'd gotten kicked out of the library several times in the past for hitting on minors, or on my mother herself. He had wandering hands and no sense of decency, and at that moment, I was alone with him. "You still working here for your ma, Cassie?" he asked easily, his steps not slowing as he approached me. I took a few instinctive steps back, putting the desk between us as a sort of barrier. Not that he couldn't work his way around that. I wondered if I'd be able to grab my mace from my purse. "You know I am, Chad," I snapped, already annoyed with him. "You know you're not supposed to be here after hours either. You need to leave, right now." He gave me an easy smile. "I just want to talk to you, sweetie. We're friends, aren't we?" I felt a heave deep in my stomach at those words. I scanned my work area for my purse, but remembered all too late it wasn't there. Fuck, I left it in the car. "No, we're not friends. If you don't leave right now, I'm going to call the cops." Not that calling the cops would do much good. The reason people like Chad could still exist in such a small community was that the cops were absolute shit. Still, I reached for the phone anyway, because I don't make threats that I don't intend to keep. Chad's polite mask slipped off then, as I knew it would. I'd been hoping he was smart enough to hightail it out of there when I made my threat, but my hope was clearly misplaced, especially since there were no witnesses to his behavior. His eyes darkened and he snarled, "You fucking bitch." In a moment, he was halfway over the desk and I shrieked. I stumbled backwards just out of reach as he lumbered towards me, sporting a tent in his pants that told me he enjoyed chasing me into a corner. In an absolute panic, I ran down the stairs to the basement, stumbling and falling the last few steps and sprawling out on the concrete. A deep pain flared up in my arm as I landed on it, and I knew instantly that it was definitely sprained, maybe broken. I could hear Chad pounding down the steps, and I crawled into the darkness, my legs shaking too hard to support myself. I had just about made it past the little circle of light. He must have turned it on before he came down, when his hand shot out and caught me by my ankle. He was freakishly strong, although I shouldn't have been surprised, given his physique. He clamped his hand down so hard I thought he might actually snap my ankle bone. I screamed again as I tried to pull myself away from him, but my attempts were futile. I heard him panting hard in arousal as he pulled me back. "Filthy little slut, been teasing me all these years. Now look what it's gotten you," he muttered, falling on top of me and pinning me down. I thrashed and yelped as he fumbled with my blouse, cursing its buttons. And then, just then, I got that feeling again. That feeling of being watched. This time it was much stronger than before. I instantly froze, suddenly feeling a great danger surrounding me. A danger other than Chad. The air in the basement seemed to have dropped a good 10 degrees, and I could see puffs of his rotten breath forming above me. On instinct, I began to strain my eyes, looking past his hulking body into the darkness, even as he undid the last button and reached for my bra. There, in the darkness, something was moving. It was as though the darkness in the room had become liquid, and it was shifting and twisting. My breath caught in my throat, and I barely felt Chad's hands on me. I had gone silent when I sensed the disturbance, but now I began to make strange wheezing noises as the liquid darkness moved towards us. Chad didn't ask if I was okay or what was wrong. I don't think he even noticed. He was too busy trying to get me out of my slacks. He never saw it, but I did. It had black fur, which was probably why I had never seen it before. Its body was absolutely massive, pushed along by 4 long, spindly legs. It looked something like a spider, but for the way it walked. Its body was obviously heavy because the legs did little more than drag it forward, its body scraping along the ground. I noticed that its legs ended in a sharp claw, making each into something of a spear. I couldn't scream. I wanted to, but I couldn't. As I lay there under the body of my would-be rapist, I was dimly aware that he hadn't quite succeeded in declothing me yet. I saw one of its front legs snap forward. It had been lumbering towards us so slowly that I almost thought it was incapable of speed. Apparently I was wrong, because in the time it took me to blink, its leg had managed to spear through Chad's chest, poking through the other side and showering me in blood. I gagged. Chad's eyes were wide open, staring at me in utter confusion as though he thought I was the one who did this. In reality, I was just as surprised as I was, especially when the leg began to split apart into smaller appendages, goring him from the inside out. In absolute horror, I crawled backwards, bumping into some boxes behind me. The creature dragged Chad's still struggling body backwards towards its bulk, before extracting its limb. With great effort, it pulled itself up on its legs. Now I could see its belly. Well, what should have been its belly. I watched its fur pull back to reveal several rows of jagged yellow teeth pointed just slightly outwards. Its maw was larger than my torso, and I watched as it lowered itself down on top of Chad. I'm glad that I couldn't see what exactly those teeth did to him. Most of my vision was blocked by the black furry body, but I did manage to see the blood. The amount of red that covered the floor and coated the beast gave me a pretty good idea of what was happening. I seem to recall that Chad's screams went on a great while longer than I expected them to. Eventually the thing finished feeding. The sickening crunch of Chad's bones stopped, and it settled itself on the floor once more. Its legs began to drag its body forward as it crawled to me. Tears were coursing down my cheeks as I thought about what had happened to Chad. I had never really planned out what kind of death I wanted, but I knew that wasn't it. I was shaking so hard the boxes behind me started to rattle as the thing crawled towards me at an agonizingly slow pace. It stopped just in front of me. I found myself frantically searching for eyes, but I found none. I had an awful moment where I wondered if it could smell me. And then something amazing happened. Something amazing and unbelievable. It lifted itself up just a bit and spit out a wrapper, a Skittles wrapper. There was a long moment where neither of us moved. The black creature was waiting for me to do something, and I was waiting to do it. Eventually, I mustered up enough courage to reach forwards and pick up the wrapper. As soon as I did, it turned itself around, dragging its heavy body back to the corner it had been hiding in. I sat there for a long moment, staring alternatively at the wrapper, and then at the mess of blood that the beast had left on the floor, splattered with the occasional eyeball or tooth. I stared and I thought. Eventually I stood up. I walked on shaking legs up the stairs until to the young adults aisle, plucking Little Women from the shelf. I walked back down to the basement, righting the chair that had been tipped over during my struggle with Chad. I sat down and in a surprisingly steady voice I began to read. It was about 2 weeks later that my mom was cleared to come back to work. Well, cleared might be a poor term. It's more that she ordered the doctor to give his consent for her to return to work. Otherwise she was going to find him and kill him in his sleep. Something to that effect. Hey, the women in my family are scary, what can I say? I decided to stick around for a few more weeks, helping my mom out as she got back to her daily routine. She observed me carefully, probably trying to decide if I knew what she thought I knew. One night as we were closing, she asked me, "Did something happen to Chad? He usually comes in at least once a day and I haven't seen him at all since I've been back." I shrugged, thinking of the hour I'd spent cleaning up the basement so there would be no trace of the incident. "Guess I don't know. Maybe he decided to skip town." "It does look that way, doesn't it?" she said, watching me closely. After a moment of silence, she said, "Would you like to read tonight, or should I?" I answered her with a grin that told her everything she needed to know. "I think I'll do it tonight. I still need to finish Little Women." My mom smiled at me, knowing that she'd found a fellow conspirator. "I know I should go back to my writing, but I'm finding it a bit hard to leave the library now. After all, it's not every day that you meet a new friend." When people talk about child marriages, most of the time they aren't thinking of America, as though America is some kind of utopia where things like that just don't happen. It's not true though, is it? Child marriage may not be as common here, sure, but it does happen. In fact, only 10 states actually have laws against it. Guess what? I didn't grow up in one of those 10 states. Even better, I grew up in a cult. Our leaders really emphasized the idea of pure brides and virginity and virility. I was taught as a child that only a young woman embodied these traits. Young woman does not mean a 20-year-old, by the way, or even an 18-year-old. That would make it almost understandable, wouldn't it? I was sold into marriage when I was 14. In a way, I was one of the lucky ones. See, in our cult, a girl came of marriageable age when she had her first period. My older sister got hers at 9 years old. I still remember her screaming in the bathroom when it happened. My mother hadn't told us anything about periods or our bodies. My sister saw all that blood and really thought she was dying. Maybe that is what it meant for her, because only a few months later she was married off. Her husband was in his mid-20s. She cried herself to sleep every night until her wedding. I never saw her again. Since the day I turned 9, I lived in mortal fear of ending up like my sister. I prayed and hoped to our version of God that I would never come of age. It was like a curse to me, to meet the same fate she did. For a while it seemed that something had answered my prayers, because year after year passed and it didn't come. My parents grew restless. When I was 12, my father checked my panties every night to make sure I wasn't hiding anything from him. But then, halfway through my 14th year, it came. It came during the night and stained my sheets, and there was no hiding it. My parents were so relieved. I was so upset I actually vomited when I saw the proof. Those stained sheets that I couldn't pray away. The man they gave me to was 43 years old. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine your own parents just giving you away to someone like that? Even though I always knew it would happen to me, it still hurt. It still poisoned something deep inside me. They didn't wait as long for my wedding as they did with my sister. Apparently my soon-to-be husband was in a rush because we were married only a month later. I won't bore you with details about my wedding or the first time meeting my husband, or the ride to our new home. I had to be dragged into the car, kicking and screaming. Instead, I'll tell you this. Everything changed on the balcony. Once he brought me home, he ushered me into the master bedroom and thankfully left me there on my own for several hours. He told me he wanted nothing more than to attend to me the way a proper husband should. And we all know what that means, don't we? But that he had to take care of some business first. Before leaving the room and locking it for good measure, he told me to dress in the lingerie that he had left for me on the bed. I eyed it with disgust before throwing it on the floor and stalking out to the balcony that I discovered behind some thick floor-to-ceiling curtains. My parents must have been proud to marry me off to someone so rich. The night was freezing cold and there was a light snow falling, slowly covering the ground below. Briefly, I considered throwing myself off the ledge, but I was too afraid. I thought that there was a small chance I might survive, and I didn't want to think about what might happen to me if I did. I'd made up my mind to go back inside and was halfway to the door when I heard something behind me. Curious, and not a little afraid, I turned back around. The thing that sat on the balcony railing was strange. It was perched there on its hind legs like an animal. Its arms trailed down to the balcony floor. They were so long I thought they might be able to reach me across the balcony where I stood. Each arm ended in a claw that looked sharp enough to cut leather. Its body was skinny, so much so that I wondered how it didn't simply fall apart. It swayed in the breeze, and its feet, well, its other set of claws, I guess, tightened their grip on the balcony. The skin on its face was dried and wrinkled. In fact, it looked almost decayed, like it was some sort of mummy. Its mouth was nothing more than a gathering of bunched-up flesh that pulled and tugged every time it stretched its jaw. Its eyes were huge, the size of baseballs, and totally white. It stared vacantly at me, and I stared back at it. The last thing I noticed was its throat. There wasn't much to notice there, really, except that it had a small slit that pulsed with every breath it took. I wondered what it was for. The thing stretched open its mouth and left it open wide for a second, giving me the chance to count its tiny, sharp shards of teeth. It tilted its head to the side and it asked me, "Why are you crying?" I lifted my fingertips to my cheek in surprise. I didn't realize I'd started crying again. Because my parents made me marry someone I don't want to, and I'm scared and I want to go home. My voice broke at that last bit. To be truthful, I wasn't really sure I wanted to go home after all. But I knew that at least I didn't want to be here anymore. In an unknown house with an unknown man who had anything but unknown intentions. The creature blinked in surprise. "Marriage, you are but a child. How can this be?" I buried my face in my hands at that and cried harder. Hearing it said aloud like that somehow made everything worse. It made everything more real. I heard a scraping sound and looked up to see the creature hunched in front of me. Even squatting on its hind legs, it was taller than me. It reached out and ran a tip of its claw down my cheek, very, very gently. "Do not cry, little one," it said. I stopped crying, more out of shock than anything else. For a second I wondered if I should be afraid of it. It didn't give me enough time to make a decision. "What is your name?" it asked. Mary." That's right, like the Virgin Mother. Hilarious, right? Like a joke I wasn't let it on until it was too late. Mary." It nodded to itself and retracted its hand. Its claw had drawn a bit of blood from my cheek. I hadn't noticed. "Mary, do not cry anymore. I will help you." "You will?" I cried. A burst of joy flooded my chest. It quickly turned to ice when the creature turned to go. It climbed up on the balcony railing and I ran after it. "Hey, wait, where are you going? Aren't you going to help me?" It looked back at me and its eyes looked almost sad. "In time. I need something from you first." "What do you want? I'll give you anything." I was breathless with fear. I didn't want it to leave, not yet. "I need your hate. When you have enough of it, I can help you." I felt my heart sink right through the floorboards. I hated very much. I hated my parents and the man in the other room and everyone else who watched my sham of a marriage and did nothing to stop it. I had so much hate, and yet it wasn't enough. I was so sure at that moment that it would never be enough. "What do I call you?" I asked. It blinked slowly, then said, "Yours. You may call me yours because that is what I am." With that, it crawled down the balcony and disappeared into the night and the snow and the quiet. And I was once again left utterly alone. I was sitting on the floor of the balcony, half covered in snow, when he returned. He dragged me back inside in disgust, furious that I'd refused to wear the lingerie he had picked out for me. He beat me, ripped off my clothes, and forced me to put it on in front of him while I sobbed. You and I both know what happened next. It's a story many women have told throughout history, and they've all told it better than I could. So you'll forgive me, I hope, for skipping the details of the next part. The next day I woke up covered in blood and bruises. He sent me downstairs to make his breakfast. I could barely walk. In that moment I hated him, but I guess I didn't hate him enough because yours didn't come back. He didn't come back until a month later. My husband treated me like a slave, having me do all the chores and cooking during the day. And then he'd rape and beat me during the night until there was blood in my urine and it hurt to sit down. One night I accidentally overcooked supper. Not burned, just left it on the stove for a few seconds too long. He beat me until I threw up, which he made me clean it up. He locked me on the balcony and made me sleep outside in the snow. And I hated him. Oh, I hated him so much. Yours came to me that night on the balcony. If it hadn't, I probably would have died from the cold. It curled around my body and kept me warm. It was surprisingly warm, for a whatever it was. It whispered assurances to me and held me close while I slept. I didn't see yours for another few months after that. The days went by with relative monotony. It wasn't until about 6 months after we were married that I realized something was wrong. It's funny in a grim sort of way. He was the one who figured it out. I was throwing up one morning and he walked into the bathroom. "When was the last time you had your period?" he asked. It hadn't been for over 2 months, and I told him as much. Stupid as I was, I didn't even realize you should have one every month. I knew it. His eyes were practically glowing with excitement as he moved behind me and snaked his arms around my belly, caressing it on the way. I suppressed the urge to vomit again. "You're with child. You are going to have my baby." He was absolutely elated. I was shaking with terror. A baby? Me? I didn't know much about having babies, but I knew it wasn't pleasant. It hurt and it made you sick, and at the end you had to take care of the thing, and how was I going to do all that? When he left for work, I sank to the floor and cried my eyes out. I cried for a full hour before managing to get up and do my chores. That night, I waited on the balcony. That night, yours came. He sat there from his perch on the balcony staring at me. My eyes and chest were hollow. "I hate him, I truly hate him," I said. "Do you?" said yours. I nodded. It beckoned to me. "Come closer." It reached out and trailed a claw down my cheek, staring at me. Its eyes held mine for a long minute before it shook its head. No, it isn't enough," I cried out as its claw fell away. "When will it be enough? I can't hate anymore, I can't. I hate him as much as I've ever hated anything. What am I supposed to do?" Yours leaned towards me and pressed its mouth to my forehead in a strange imitation of a kiss. "In time," it said. That was all the comfort it gave before it scuttled down the balcony and left me to my darkness. In the months that followed, my stomach grew bigger. My worries ballooned at about the same pace. My husband wouldn't take me to see a doctor. He told me that I would have a home birth. He wouldn't get me any medicine. He wouldn't tell me what I was supposed to do to keep the baby healthy. I didn't know anything about my own pregnancy. Worse still, I kept worrying about what would come after the birth. What if it was a girl? See, if it was a boy, I wouldn't have to be so worried. Boys were allowed to go to school. They were allowed to choose their wives. They were allowed to come and go as they please. But not girls. What if I had a daughter? I wondered what my husband would do to her, how he would look at her, if he would touch her. I thought about marrying her off to someone twice her age. I thought about never seeing her again, just like I'd never see my sister again. I thought an awful lot about that. So I suppose you might say what happened was a blessing, although at the time it certainly didn't feel that way. My husband came home drunk one night, angry, looking for a fight. Something had gone wrong at work, I suppose. He had some nights like that. But I foolishly thought he'd leave me alone this time. After all, I was several months along at that point. I don't know how many. But my stomach was protruding rather obviously from my skinny frame. He didn't much care about me other than as a sex doll, but I knew he cared about the child. Apparently he didn't care enough. That night when he beat me, I begged him to stop. I told him he would hurt the baby. Somehow that made him even more angry. And when he punched me hard in the stomach, I knew he felt no remorse for what he did. I fell to the floor, holding my belly, clutching at it while I screamed. He screamed at me in turn, blaming me, of course. Blaming me for losing the baby, because we both knew it was dead. It couldn't sustain a blow like that and live. An hour later, the blood started. I hadn't particularly wanted that child, but I still cried. I cried for it and for myself and for what had become of my life. I cried even as he screamed at me through the bathroom door for being a stupid slut, a whore, a Babylonian skank, a devil's curse. Once he was done with his screaming, he stumbled to his bed and collapsed into a drunken slumber. I waited until I was sure he was out cold before unlocking the door. I dragged myself out onto the balcony, a trail of blood following in my wake. I collapsed on the balcony floor, looking up at the moon, wanting to curse it like I had been cursed. I sat there on my knees and screamed at the sky, trying to pour out all the hate and rage and anger. Instead, I made it grow bigger and bigger and bigger. Yours appeared over the balcony railing. It knew something was different this time. It came and sat next to me, running its claw through my hair. It was trying to soothe me. There was nothing left to soothe. I could tell it was waiting, so I spoke. "I hate him," I said. I was calm. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply spoke from somewhere in my chest that had been locked until that very moment. I hate him for what he has done to me, and to the baby. I hate my parents for giving me to him. I hate the people who looked on and who did nothing. I hate them all, and I want them to suffer. I don't know what I expected from yours just then, if I thought it'd be triumphant or sadistic or happy. All I know is that I didn't expect the way it looked at me. Sad, compassionate, resigned. "It is time then for me," it sighed, its voice a rasp on the wind that I could barely hear. "If I do this, a piece of you will come away with me forever. Do you understand?" I nodded at it. There was so little of me left, but if it wanted me, it could have me. It could have all the pieces. I didn't want them. It moved to a crouch then, just low enough that it could slip its claw into mine. It held my hand as it brought me into the room where my husband slept. It looked at me with its blank eyes and said, "Watch." I did. Yours straightened its spine. As it did so, its neck became longer, and longer, and longer. I could hear its spine cracking and creaking as its neck unfurled. The slit in its neck began to widen until it gaped open, exposing the darkness of its innards. From inside the slit, two muscles darted out. They were long and firm, resembling spider legs, but for the fact that they had no fur on them. They didn't even seem to have skin. It was just red, pulsing flesh crawling out from somewhere inside it. A deep hacking sound emanated from inside its chest as they continued to grow until they reached maximum extension. Tipped with a sharp, bony point, the two appendages rested on the floor, tapping impatiently against the floorboards. Yours shifted until it was on all fours, its body about the height of my head. It moved forward at a painfully slow pace, approaching the bed where my husband slumbered. I noticed its eyes were closed, and it used its throat appendages to feel around the bed until it found his flesh. Once it had a sense for where my husband lay, its claws came forward. One grasped my husband near his collarbone, the other grabbed his pelvis. Yours leaned forward, and all was still for a moment. Then it pulled. It yanked its claws apart hard, so hard that my husband's body ripped in half. By the time he awoke and began to scream, he was already in two separate parts, his internal organs spilling out between them. His agonized screams were soon drowned out by the blood filling his throat. As he sped towards death, the strange muscles extending from yours throat began to comb through his organs, picking them apart and bringing them back to the maw in its neck. It swallowed my husband down piece by piece while its claws raked along his body, flaying him open. By the time yours had eaten its fill, he was half consumed, a mess of blood and flesh that was unrecognizable as human. He twitched for a long time after he died. Eventually, the appendages retracted back into yours throat. The process took several minutes, during which time I stared at the bloody mess on the bed. I wondered if I'd always remember that. If maybe one day images of his face would be replaced with this image of my triumph. I could only hope. When yours was finished, it crawled back to me. "What happens now?" I asked. "I am yours," it replied. "You must choose." A kind old man in a pickup truck brought me into the hospital several hours later. He'd found me walking on the side of the road, covered in blood, most of it mine, and had offered me a ride, no questions asked. I wasn't afraid. I knew that I had a protector watching over me, a guardian angel missing its wings. The police came, of course. I told them every detail of what happened. At first they were appalled, then bewildered. By the time I finished, they were convinced I was crazy. They were a little less convinced after they found my husband's body, or what was left of it. I was surprised how little I had to deal with the police, actually. I thought maybe they'd lock me up or open some big investigation or something. Instead, they informed me that my husband had been a very powerful man, that if they made his marriage to me known, I might become a target. I would be blamed for his death. I would be treated like a whore who had him killed. After all, among rich men, such things as what he did to me can be overlooked. The official news story said that he died of a heart attack. The police knew that I didn't kill him. There's no way I physically could have done something like that, especially to someone more than twice my size. They probably thought that I had somebody kill him. I suppose they aren't wrong. They wanted to put me in foster care. I didn't entertain that thought for even a second. As soon as I was able to, I left the hospital and never looked back. They didn't look very hard for me. The next visit I paid was to my parents. It took me a while to find them. I'd barely ever left my house growing up, and I didn't even know my own address. But I found them. They were surprised to see me, and uneasy. I wonder if they ever felt guilty for what they did. Either way, it didn't matter. I asked them what happened to my sister. They told me they didn't know, but I could tell they were lying. Yours helped me take care of them. It held them down and skinned them slowly, keeping them alive for hours as they screamed and begged for mercy. Finally, they told me the truth. My sister had been murdered by her husband 2 years after she'd been married off. I let yours kill them then. I didn't have any more use for them. As he finished them off, I searched the house and stole as much cash as I could find. I drifted for the next few years. I used the money I took from my parents to forge some documents so I could get work. They were obvious fakes, but some employers don't really care. A lot of them gave me work out of pity, I think. They thought I was alone in the world. But I was never alone. I always had yours to comfort me. I still don't know much about yours. I don't know what it is or where it comes from. Of the few people I've told, most seem to think it's some kind of a demon. I know that's not true. Nobody can live through what I've lived and still believe in God. People like me don't have the luxury of that kind of fantasy. No, I think yours is just another creature, like you or me, trying to make its way in the world. And it has grown quite fond of me, I can tell. I know now what it meant when it told me that I had to give it a piece of myself. Each time I command it, you see, it takes away a little piece of my humanity. I couldn't feel it at first. After all, I didn't think I had any humanity left. But after it took both my parents, I could feel that something in me was changing. It happens just a little at a time, but it happens nonetheless. It didn't want to do that. It didn't want to take anything away from me, but it was the only way to save me. It's what must be, the consequences of our deal. It mourns for me. It mourns for the humanity I've lost and for the childhood that I never had. It mourns because I cannot love. Well, that's not true. I love yours. I don't love anything else. I don't think I ever will. Each day when I look in the mirror, I see something that's a little less than human. Maybe that is its doing. Or maybe a substantial part of my humanity died when I was forced into that marriage. I'll never know. What's more, I don't particularly care. Lately, I have been thinking about all the other little girls trapped in these marriages all across the U.S. The ones who think they've been abandoned, forgotten about. The ones who are waiting for someone to come save them because they cannot save themselves. But I could save them. I could do it. I don't know how much humanity I have left to give, how much until I no longer even remotely resemble a person. But I think that it's worth it. If I can save even one child from the fate I was given, from the choices I had to make, it will be worth it. It mourns for me now, too, that I've made my decision. But I won't regret it. I won't regret giving my life and my humanity for something bigger than myself. Perhaps in time I too will be like yours. Or yours will be like me. I only hope it stays with me so I don't have to go it alone. Yes, that's what I must do. I'm ready now. Are you? I'd signed up for a retreat in the Australian outback. A self-guided experience designed to help you disconnect from everything. The brochure promised the kind of solitude you couldn't find anywhere else. A chance to reconnect with yourself through long walks on the trails, journaling by the campfire, and a night under the stars. The retreat center was little more than a cabin with a few supplies stocked. Water, non-perishable food, and maps. You were meant to stay out on the trails, only returning to the cabin when you needed to restock. The place was remote, isolated. No guides, no schedules, just you in the wilderness. The idea was to get lost in the land and in turn, find yourself. I'd come out here for that very reason. My life had been crumbling for the last few years. A divorce, a dead-end job, and a sense of lost direction had left me exhausted. Like a man who had been running a race for too long only to realize he had been headed in the wrong direction the entire time. I thought a retreat like this might help me clear my mind, give me the space to think without the constant pull of responsibilities, of the noise that had drowned out any semblance of peace. The first few days were peaceful, though unsettling in their quiet. No phones, no distractions, just the vast expanse of desert and bush. I'd grown used to the silence, the way the wind seemed to hum through the trees and the rustling of unseen creatures in the brush. But by the fourth day, I'd wandered farther than I'd intended. The sun was setting, and I was trying to find a spot to camp when I saw it. A truck parked a few hundred meters off the trail. It was old, the paint chipped and rusted in places, its tires worn from what seemed like years of use. It didn't belong out here, not in the wilderness. A truck like that meant the driver wasn't from the retreat, wasn't a part of the isolated, self-guided life the center promised. Whoever owned it had to have come in from somewhere far away. I had to admit I was curious. I veered off the trail, careful not to make a sound, and moved toward it. That's when I saw him. A man crouched beside a shallow hole, the fading light of sunset casting long shadows on the dirt. His hands were working in the earth with slow, deliberate motions. He didn't seem to notice me, but I wasn't sure if that was because he was too focused on his task or if he simply didn't care. "Evening," I called out, unsure if he would acknowledge me. He looked up at me, his eyes dark and calm, and nodded. "Evening," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "You out here alone?" I hesitated. "Yeah, just on the retreat." He didn't respond immediately, his gaze flicking briefly to my backpack, the map still sticking out of it. "Out here to get away from things?" he asked, almost like he already knew the answer. I nodded, not wanting to explain too much. "Something like that." He offered a small, knowing smile, then gestured to the hole he was digging. "You ever stop and think about what's out here under the earth? What's buried? It's all got its place, just like us. All of us out here trying to make sense of things." I didn't know how to respond to that. Something about the way he said it made it sound like he wasn't talking just about the dirt. My eyes flicked to the tarp he was folding beside the hole. It was large, heavy, and whatever was wrapped in it seemed to have a strange weight to it. "What's in the tarp?" I asked, my curiosity getting the better of me. The man didn't look at it, didn't seem bothered by the question. He simply gave a small shrug, a vague gesture. "Something that's better left buried. Some things out here, they don't belong above ground." I wasn't sure if that was a cryptic answer or just the ramblings of a man who'd spent too much time in the wilderness. But I couldn't help but glance at the truck again, its faded red paint standing out against the brush. He hadn't come from the retreat. He was out here on his own, far from anything resembling the cabin or the trails. "How long have you been out here?" I asked, still trying to piece together who this man was. "A while," he said simply. "Not a lot of folks around these parts. I like it that way." I looked down at the hole again. It was shallow, hastily dug, but it was clear he'd been working at it for some time. There was a strange calmness in his demeanor that made me uneasy. "You know," he said, his voice almost a whisper, "the land can teach you things. Things you can't learn by sitting inside. The snakes, the buzzards, even the dirt. It all tells a story if you know how to listen." "Buzzards?" I asked, unsure where he was going with this. He nodded, his eyes tracking the circling shadows overhead. "They're not just scavengers. They clean up what's already been killed. They don't take anything they don't need. Same with the snakes, especially the king browns. They're dangerous, sure, but they're also purposeful. They kill what's necessary. They don't waste. The land, it works like that." His words hung in the air, unsettling and cryptic. "What do you mean by necessary?" I asked, trying to push past my unease. He met my gaze, his expression unreadable. "Some things are meant to die, others are meant to survive." There was something about the way he said it that left me feeling like I had just stumbled into something I wasn't meant to understand. The wind shifted, and I glanced at the horizon, where the last rays of the sun were fading into darkness. "I should probably get going," I said, trying to mask the discomfort in my voice. I wasn't sure what was happening here, but it was starting to feel more like an encounter I was meant to walk away from than one I should stay for. The man gave a small nod, then slowly packed up the tarp, leaving it in place beside the hole. Without a word, he turned to his truck. I watched him load several tools, old, well-used, and caked in dirt, into the back of the vehicle. A shovel, a small pickaxe, a coil of rope. As he shut the tailgate, his eyes met mine one last time. "Take care of yourself out here," he said, his tone still calm, but there was a quiet finality to it. "Not everything you bury stays buried." I watched as he climbed into the truck, started the engine, and drove off into the distance, the old vehicle kicking up a cloud of dust that clung to the air long after the sound of the engine had faded. The next morning, I went back to the spot where I'd met him. The hole was filled in, the tarp still lying there untouched. No sign of the man. No sign of the truck. It was as if they had never been there at all. When I asked the retreat staff about the man or the truck, they didn't know what I was talking about. They said there was no one out there but the retreat guests and a few park rangers from a nearby station. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the man was part of the land, just as much a presence in that desolate place as the snakes, the buzzards, or the wind. If anyone knows anything about a man like that, someone who spends time alone out here, buried in the dust and the silence, please let me know. I don't think I'll be going back to that part of the outback again, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm not the first one to have crossed paths with him. A few days after my encounter with the strange man, I returned to the cabin for a resupply. The retreat was self-guided and isolated, designed for introspection, with the cabin serving as a stopover point between hikes. It wasn't meant to be a place to stay overnight unless there was an emergency. The idea was to rest, stock up on supplies, and continue the journey. I hadn't planned to spend much time there, but as the sun dipped lower and the shadows stretched long across the land, I found myself making my way back, not thinking much of it. When I got close, though, something felt wrong. The first thing that caught my attention was the door. It was locked, as it should have been, but the wood was marked, dented, and pushed in around the edges, like something had tried to force its way through. I didn't linger there, but it made me pause, uncertain. The cabin was supposed to be secure. It was supposed to be empty. The second thing I noticed was the window. It had been broken. The glass was no longer scattered across the floor, as you'd expect. Instead, it was pushed all into the corner of the room, as if something or whatever had taken care to shove the shards out of the way. The window frame itself was undisturbed, but the glass, that wasn't how it should have been. I stood outside for a moment, wondering if I should enter. It was quiet, too quiet, but I convinced myself to check the inside, figuring maybe there was a simple explanation. Whatever had been in there was long gone now. As I stepped through the door, I saw that things had been moved. The cot, which I knew was always tucked away in the back room, had been pulled out and placed in the center of the floor. It wasn't just moved. It was as though something had put it there with some care, but no particular intention. The mattress was still there, flat and unused, but it was clear something had been through. What really stopped me in my tracks were the scattered remnants around the room, old, unidentifiable clumps of hair. It was just there, scattered in different parts of the room, deteriorating as if it had been left for a long time. I didn't stay long enough to look more closely. What struck me more than the disarray was the careful attempt to fix the window. Whatever had been inside had gathered rocks and sticks, placing them in the broken seal with some effort, trying to block the hole and keep the elements out. The care taken with it was unsettling. Like whatever had done it still had some semblance of purpose. It didn't make sense for me to have walked into a cabin with something unknown lingering inside. Whatever had happened, whatever had been there, was gone. The place felt abandoned in its own way, like it had been a long time since anything had touched it. I left quickly after that. The retreat staff, when I reported what I'd found, seemed unsurprised. Claire, the manager, promised they'd look into it. But there was something about the way she said it that felt off, as if this was not the first time something strange had been reported. I didn't push for details. I wasn't sure I wanted any. The retreat isn't a large place, and the cabin is a simple one, really. The guests are given keys to the cabin, and the staff has them too. We're all expected to use it only for supplies, a brief stop to replenish before heading back out into the wilderness. It was meant to be a solitary experience, one of self-reflection, with as little interference as possible. But whatever had been in there, it felt like it shouldn't have been. I wasn't supposed to encounter anything like that. I stayed out in the bush that night, setting up camp under the wide open sky, trying to shake the feeling that the land itself was holding something back, but there wasn't much point in staying longer. The cabin wasn't a place to rest for me anymore. I left the next day, continuing my walk back to where I'd come from. The outback stretched out in every direction, quiet and unyielding. I didn't look back. Now I've returned home. The memories from the retreat linger in my thoughts, unsettling and fragmentary. I haven't been able to make sense of what happened. There's no clear explanation, nothing I can hold on to. It's just an impression, a feeling that whatever had been out there wasn't finished with me. But maybe I'll go back one day. Maybe not. There's still something about that place, something that's hard to shake. If anyone else has spent time on this retreat, or if you've experienced something strange out there, I'd be interested to hear. Maybe there's something I missed, or something that connects what happened. maybe it's better not to know. For now, though, I think I've gotten my fill of the outback, at least for a while. Heroine, the mistress of ruin. She takes your emulsified form and melts you down like butter in a warm pan, and you welcome it. Of course, in all my infinite wisdom, I thought it would be different for me. I had just passed the Illinois State Bar and decided it would be harmless to snort some H at the party I threw afterward to celebrate. 2 years, 3 overdoses, and an eviction later, I was living on the winter streets of Chicago. A track mark-laden junkie, blasting off to Neptune any chance I got. My family tried to reach out and find me any way they could to get me into rehab, but the mistress of ruin had sunken her claws deep in me and I saw only her. That was until one afternoon I found a golden ticket, stuffed into the pocket of a dead junkie in an alleyway. I'm now free from one mistress, yet haunted by another. One even more sinister, one even more deadly. Because to know her is to know we haven't the slightest clue what goes on in the corners of the world. It's there, in the dark side of the mind, where she grows like a wild weed. And she's not alone. It won't be long now before everything changes forever. My name is Angelo Moretti, and this is my story of sobriety. From H and from everything I thought I knew about the world. This is how I found the city of Underhale. One, I hadn't been on the streets for more than a couple of days, and yet I was too high to plan for the negative 20-degree windshield that had begun to blow in from the northwest. The shelters had filled their vacancies long before my eyelashes had begun to freeze. I received a tip about an alley that had a little tucked-away corner that was out of the wind. When I got there, some other homeless smackheads had already nestled in, probably from the same tip, our street dealer, and had lit some trash fires inside a few metal barrels. That way they could warm their hands enough to guide needles into veins without too much of a fuss. Other than my makeshift recliner, a wadded-up comforter from my bed in the apartment I had just been thrown out of, and a trash bag full of recycled paper, I was blasted off as usual. The dealer had given us some good shit. These people were professional dope fiends, and by looking at them you would have thought the shit had melted all of the bones in their bodies as they all lay there in the grime. I was no different. I noticed a man a few feet away from me whose back wedged into the corner where the brick walls met. He held his palm out at me in want of what I had in mine, and I gave a lazy toss of the hypodermic toward him. It bounced on its plunger before toppling short of his feet. I heard the metal of the needle scrape filthy asphalt. He picked it up and rolled his sleeve above the elbow without wiping it clean. We never exchanged a single word, but his eyes had struck me. Dirt smeared his hard-lined face, and a dark, scraggly beard covered much of his gauntness. But those eyes, they held a sharp intelligence in them I hadn't seen on this low side of the world that was now my own. The dark eyes looked haunted. I'd guessed at the time that was why he was where he was, to fix that glint of despair, to dull some vague knowing of himself or his life he didn't want to possess. It didn't much matter. Still, something in them reminded me of myself. The H had hit me hard and pulled the light switch out on me, and when I awoke, the man was dead in his corner. His eyes had fixed their gaze to permanence on me, but the haunt in them had gone. They now looked placid, peaceful. They looked like calm waters after a tempest had thrashed in them for far too long. As I regarded the dead man, the sudden awful odor of ammonia filled the air. My nose and eyes burned like hell. I strained to focus and look around, but I was still too fucked up to have my wits, or do much of anything except lie there and look for the acrid odor's source. Within the fading light of the alleyway, the silhouette of a tall, thin man in a blue suit grew larger as he walked closer to our little den. His shoes clicked echoes with each step that hung in the air. Some of the others had also begun to rouse from their highs, and groggy heads turned to regard the man. Once their eyes fixed themselves upon him, they rolled to the backs of their heads and their mouths froze open in silent screams. Their hands gnarled and curled at harsh angles before crumbling over rigid like a bunch of frozen wasps. I tried to collect myself, tried to prop myself up on all fours to stand and run, but I was still too skagged to go anywhere. The man approached the dead junkie next to me and looked down at his lifeless body. That caustic smell, it was sickening. His suit looked clean and pressed, but outdated like it had maybe been in fashion during the late 80s or early 90s. The deepening shadows of twilight masked much of his face, but the fire's flickering embers offered me teases of what seemed to be a tight, hard skin of a manila color. Helpless to do anything else, I simply watched as he spoke to the dead junkie. He sighed, knelt to the corpse, and placed a tender hand on his chest. "I'm sorry. I wish you wouldn't have held on to it for so long, but I'm sorry this is how it ended." Another quite different voice spoke that sounded like it also came from the man, although I couldn't see his mouth moving as the new words filled the alley. Unlike the soft, slight voice that had come from the man's mouth, this one was much harsher and less refined. "Jesus," the voice said. "I mean, I get it, but he had to have known the guy would fold like this. Why did he even have us give the ticket to him?" The man stood to his feet, gave a sullen downward glance, and shook his head. "I don't know." "Poor guy. Well, what do we do now?" The man shook his head again and then turned on his heels to look around for some vague discovery of which he was supposed to find, but had been given no direction. He scanned the paralyzed, silent screamers until he eventually trained his eyes on me. I was still lying there, dazed and doped up to all hell, but the only one conscious. The disembodied voice croaked, "Holy shit, this one is still awake." The man approached me in the dark and knelt. Shadows filled the hollows of his gaunt face. His nose looked prosthetic and was a little off color in contrast with his manila skin. Although he didn't look old, dead maybe, but not much more than in his mid-40s, his sheer gauntness carved clear outlines of 2 sets of dentures around the folds of his lips. He was horrible. A nightmare. I blurted an idiot moan of fear and tried to roll away from him. "Get the fuck away from me," I muttered as I kicked my feet out, shuffling my body against the trash-laden wall. The man remained knelt there with one knee to the ground and an arm propped on the other knee with his hand dangling casually. He looked deep into my eyes, the same as the dead junkie had before he sent himself into the endless night. This man's eyes, however, did not match the horror that was the rest of his face. I saw a tenderness in them, a deep sadness, a pity-filled knowing I couldn't quite understand at the time. He reached a comforting hand out to place it on my ankle. I kicked it away and made a vain attempt to scurry further from him. "There's something in that man's pocket over there, and I've reason to believe it's for you," he said. He pointed to the dead junkie. His name was Michael, and he was a lot more than what he became. "I don't know what's planned for you, but I suspect you'll look in that pocket of his one way or another, whether you want to or not." He looked sorry as he spoke the words. The man's face darkened and the softness in his eyes turned stern and dire. "For now, I believe he just wants you to see. Don't lose heart, and don't lose the coin. It will be your light in the dark. If you make it, I'll be seeing you again." Terror and confusion had overwhelmed me beyond the point of action. I just lay there with my back wedged against the wall. The man returned to his feet and the disembodied voice spoke again. "All right, Billy. Let's get out of here. I think we're done." With the man much closer, I thought I could see the knot of his tie speaking the words I couldn't place before. "All right, Moore. Let's go home." He turned around and walked back down the dark alleyway in the same direction from which he came. As he left, the patters of his shoes rang deep into my mind. I sprung awake again. The nodders had left their rolled eyes and silent screams behind, seemingly unaware. They were back to doing all the degenerate things that got them there in the first place. I scrambled to my feet, pressed my back against the wall, and looked over at the dead junkie who had calmed his haunted eyes with the needle moments before. No, not moments before, I thought. The skin had begun to turn hue to match the sharp coldness of the air, and those dark eyes had lightened and begun to cloud over. I must have been out for at least several hours. He'd lain there and hardened his joints, and the circus around us had continued. My face lit wild, and I darted the area for the strange nightmare man with the manila skin. Billy, I think it was. But that had surely been a dream. I'd remembered this Billy had mentioned something to me about something I had needed in his pocket. A fix? Cute joke. A funny one, too, because the punchline would be me, inevitably browsing the pockets of a dead man for theoretical smack. But I don't think that was what he meant. "Don't lose heart, and don't lose the coin," he'd said to me. But before that, that other voice, something about hanging on to a ticket of some kind, trying to use the few neurons I had left in my poisoned mind for deciphering a drug-fueled dream seemed ridiculous to me. But those clouded dark eyes, once tempests, still fixed their gaze upon me. I decided I had to get the fuck out of that alley. I would run to find some police so the officials could come to collect the poor bastard and take him to his final home. But first I needed to cover those eyes. I grabbed a dirty t-shirt from the ground and laid it over his face. My curiosity had gotten the better of me. I'd known it was absurd, but just maybe there was something in there. Maybe even a free score. I spidered some fingers into his coat's breast pocket. There was something after all. I could feel frilled edges on some large, firm card paper. I pulled it out, and sure enough, a 5x8 ticket, golden and glistening with the strands of light from the barrel fire's flames. I looked at the dead man again, and although he was now veiled with some horrid thing a prostitute had likely tossed aside, I could still feel his gaze from beneath the cloth. Cold lead dropped in my stomach. I looked closer at the stamped writing on its front. Admit 1 Subterranean, Underhale. Waterworks tainted. The Noradrin Chronicles, Angelo. That fire isn't going to help you with the impending whiteout. It's warm down there. Go on in, and hang on to the coin. Underneath the writing was a round insignia that stuck out from the paper a few millimeters. At its center was what looked to be an anagram of both an upturned splayed man and a tree. I dropped the card and stammered backward. No words were in my mind. It was too filled with animal panic. I looked up and saw flurries traveling parallel to the ground with a gale of cold wind that not even the alleyway could break. The other junkies made languid attempts to shield themselves from the blast, and when it came for a second time and didn't stop, they huddled together. I looked back at the ground where I had dropped the ticket and then saw that it was in my hand again. I reread the words that were directly to me. Angelo, that fire isn't going to help you with the impending whiteout. How is this happening? Next to the veiled dead man had appeared a copper hatch, tinged green with oxidation and large enough to fit through. I tottered closer. Steamed air billowed from its lid seam. As I drew nearer, I could feel its humid warmth. The frail moan of a man behind me cut through the wind, and I spun on my heels to see if the others noticed the steaming hatch. "Do you see this here?" I yelled at them as I pointed to it. Winced eyes that looked as though they were in no mood for crazy ramblings paid me only a moment's attention before the handful of degenerates returned to their huddling. I was almost certain I'd lost my mind, that H must have been a bad batch. Still, confusion and terror gripped me and I ran from the alley. Once I made it to the street, the wind nearly blew me off my balance. I couldn't see more than 20 feet in front of me. The few buildings I could get to had been sealed down and locked tight, and if anyone was watching me from within one of them, they gave no indication they would let me inside. I had nowhere to go. I was done for if I stayed out in the open. Probably done for in the alleyway if the blizzard lasted too long. I thought of the warmth that had radiated from the hatch and made my way back. And when I returned, it was waiting, billowing and beckoning and calling me forth. My face was numb. My hands were numb. My feet were numb. I walked to it and stood above the lid. Thank God, warmth, but it wasn't enough. I turned to them once more. They were still hurtled with cold-blasted pain. I was going to die out there with them if I didn't go in. I'm ashamed to say that my main worry wasn't actually the cold or the cadaver man Billy and all of the impossible things that came along with him when he entered that alley. It wasn't the strange hatch that had appeared out of nowhere. It wasn't the ticket in my hand that refused to leave and seemed to know me and the weather forecast. It was that I didn't have any more H and didn't know how long I'd be down there, hiding away from the cold. I even had a thought in my mind that I'd come back up later to see if any of them were dead from the winter storm, so I could check their pockets. That's how bad I was then. I held the ticket out, not knowing what to do with it. The hatch sprung open with a slow yawn, and when I looked back at my hand, the ticket burned away to ash, and all that was left was a coin bearing that same insignia. I put it in my jacket pocket. Visible from the opening was the top rung of a rusted metal ladder, and sweet Jesus, that warmth again, stronger now and filled with life. A battle raged in my mind for a moment, and when I realized I had no choice, I turned one last time to yell for the others to join me. They offered me no more than a moment's glance before going back to their terror and misery and doom. They had dismissed me for mad. At the time, I had thought they were likely right, but I didn't much care. The heat I felt on my skin felt real enough, and even if this was my end, it was better than dying in misery. I crawled into the hatch and descended. Dank air filled my lungs as I moved down the ladder. A faint yellow glow somewhere below and out of sight offered my eyes enough light to make out the vague shape of a stone walkway about 15 feet down. Beside it, I saw golden twinkles from the glow's origin reflecting off running water. I made it about halfway down when the ladder turned to ash in my hands and beneath my feet, and I fell the rest of the way to damp, cobbled stone. The hatch slammed shut above me, suddenly and furiously, snatching the gray winter night sky away as if to tell me the world I had been a part of was gone now. Done. At least for me. I rolled over and propped to my knees to get my bearings. Lamps fixed upon stone walls, their incandescent bulbs offering dim light that revealed both mine and the other side of what seemed to be some sort of canal. Ahead of me, about 80 or so feet, a causeway stretched over the water with dome shafts on either side. That ticket, it said something about under, something, and waterworks. Behind me was a dead end, just an algae-caked grating that dark rushes of water flowed through, headed in the direction of the causeway. I paced back and forth beneath the ladder, trying and failing to come to grips with everything. I thought about the other words on the card. Something about some chronicles or something, with some weird spelling. I thought about what the strange man had mentioned. For now, I believe he just wants you to see. None of it made any sense. I had to be dying up there in the cold or from the smack or both. I fell to my knees and pitied myself. And this is how it ends. What a waste. I had resigned to my fate, to what I had finally done to myself after these 2 long years of dancing with my mistress of ruin. A part of me was relieved. After a while, I stood to my feet and thought of walking along the water edge's stone path toward the causeway. As soon as I did, I heard the distant voices of what sounded like men. The muffling of the echoes made it too hard to decipher their words, but I could make out at least 2 of them. They seemed to be prattling. They were coming from the leftward shaft ahead of me. The soft glow of lantern light began emanating from its opening. As the voices loudened, their words unclouded. Aye, the last time I was back in these ways, I was chasing that damn Davies girl. Fucking bitch slipped right out of me webs, she did. A throaty voice said with an accent that wasn't quite British. A tighter, scratchier voice replied, less muddied but still thick with that strange accent. Been that long? I wonder where the assembly put her to serve old Marie for being so naughty. The voice spasmed an ugly titter that rebounded from the walls more harshly than the rest of their words. I know where they put her. Oh, you do you? Have an audience with the assembly, eh? I do. Well, not I. Argus knows one of the chamberlains in the tunnel. To this day, she's still in the daughter's chair serving as steward until Lady Guinevere comes home to our Mother Marigold. The deeper voice sounded almost harmonious as he uttered the name of their mother. The higher voice gave an incredulous squawk. You say so? Aye, poor girl. An eruption of laughter swelled in the passages as their light drew near the threshold of the shaft. I pressed my back against the wet stone, in a dim place that was in between 2 of the fixed lamps. I wasn't quite shrouded in shadow, but with nowhere to hide, it was the best concealment I was going to get. They passed the threshold and came into view on the causeway. They weren't men at all. One stood large and broad and completely devoid of any hair. With clawed, webbed fingers, he held a strange and ornate lantern made of copper. His gray skin took his lantern light and wore it proudly with the sheen of an amphibian. Little ear holes burrowed in on the sides of his head. Thin lips and a mouth much too wide to belong to any man's hung below 2 minor nostril slits. And above those, beady, lidless black eyes with rings of flecked gold at their centers. They glimmered from the lantern like ambers. The other wore a sheened fedora, its large brim masking much of his face, but was much slighter and smaller in stature. Both donned olive-colored trench coats that looked like they were made of vinyl or something waterproof. Long, rudder-like tails flittered from in between their coat seams and occasionally swept the floor. The bigger one held the lantern out in front of them, and they peered down the dead-end corridor inquisitively. So, 'twas you Rubble, or another of the runners? The smaller hollered out in my direction, sealing the words with a mirthy hiss. Shadows had masked me for the moment, but I knew I didn't have long. I thought about jumping across the canal, but 15 feet, and without even a running start. I could plunge into the water, I'd thought, but those creatures, those impossible things that could only exist in a child's nightmare, seemed to be built for it. With nerves wire-tight, I decided my best chance was to stay put. Maybe I could use the skills I'd learned in law school to talk my way out of the situation. It was all I had. The 2 creatures moved a mere few steps forward before the bigger one spotted me. They approached and stopped about 10 feet away. A sharp smile rose on the big one's face, revealing a mass of needle-thin teeth and pink gums. It looks like it's a runner. You might get to show off your handiwork yet, Danforth. Danforth quacked an excited little laugh. The big one went on, speaking directly to me now. Go on, come on into the light so your pal Bircher can have a good look at you. Knowing I was exposed and, at least for the moment, helpless, I did as he asked, ghost white and hands shaking. My nerves felt like they had enough charge in them to jump a car battery. Upon my revealing myself, they looked at each other with mildly confused glances. Bircher spoke again. A big one, and you've got that stinking fuzz on your face. I don't remember seeing the likes of you brought in. How old are ye? Genuine curiousness coded his question. I don't know what's happening. I held my palms outward, displaying an unconscious attempt to diffuse what didn't seem like it was going to be a friendly encounter. How old are ye? Bircher snapped at me with a guttural growl underneath that told me there was at least as much monster beneath the surface as there was man. I'm 27. None of those smooth words I had planned were going to come to me. I was certain of that now. 27? A full-growner? Danforth asked, disbelieving. Bircher took a step forward and held the lantern out for a better look. He smelled like murky water and musk that reminded me of catfish. You lying to us, boy? He isn't lying. He's even got a gray or two in that fuzz of his. Not much of a boy at all, is he? The golden flecked rings in their eyes glimmered as the lantern light reflected in them, like circles of fire in black, oily pools. With a brief clicking noise, translucent membranes flicked closed and open again to wet each of Bircher's blazing beads. Look, I just wanted out of the cold. The ladder, it just... What you mean, ladder? Bircher chopped the words right from my mouth with his question. Those dubious and mildly amused expressions on their faces snapped away in an instant. Where did you hail from, boy that was? He asked with a low oiliness that almost sounded serene, that almost hid the sardonic tone beneath it. A pause, and then Danforth joined in with the same sweet, sickly bemusement of his partner. Yes, boy, nevermore. Tell us where you came from. The words from his mouth had tails on them, lingering in the air with nothing else but the gurgle of the canal's running water to keep them company. Without turning around, I pointed a trembling, dirty finger backward at the hatch I had crawled down from. I came from up there. Their gold rings shifted up to where my finger led them for a moment and then returned to me, humorless. I turned to look at where the hatch had been, and there was nothing. Just damp, algae-covered stone and shadow. I was going to freeze to death. This man, he gave me this ticket that led me here through, that I swear to Christ in heaven was just there a moment ago. I can just go. It's clear I'm trespassing here, and I'll just leave. I was pleading now. They stared at me in silence. Please. I won't tell anyone about this place. I'm really terribly sorry. Oh, we know you won't tell anyone, Danforth said. Something about his words reminded me that I was talking to creatures that couldn't exist in the real world. I lowered my arms and cast a downward glance. I'm dead, aren't I? They only answered with bellows of hoarse laughter, as if they had been caught off guard. A man, you say? Bircher asked with remnants of laughter still airing through his teeth. I nodded. And what does this man look like? He looks like a walking corpse in a blue suit, I replied, still sounding incredulous despite what was in front of me. It was the most honest description I could give. They straightened again and exchanged glances, looking as though they were deciding whether to be concerned. The smile that had taken a brief leave from Bircher's thin lips curled back into place. He didn't do you any favors by sending you down here. And no, you're not dead. Although you look like you should have done your old world a favor. Some bag of shit, are you? I can smell the stink of poison in those pores. There is no death in Underhale, boy, nevermore. Not for your kind. The gold-flecked rings darted back and forth in calculation beneath Danforth's hat brim. We ought to take him to the assembly so they can figure out what to do with his claims on how he got here. His hat wobbled for a moment as if something alive stirred underneath it. With a swift, catching grab, he fastened it back down again. Bircher nodded in agreement. You still wanting to brush up with some time with the knife? I don't see a reason he can't be in his skinnies when we take him in. Danforth nodded and gave a toothy grin as his eyes trained on mine. Please, I didn't ask for any of this. I just want to go home. I began taking slow steps backward. Sick glee lit their faces and their smooth gray tails twitched like excited worms. They stepped forward with each of my own backward paces. Danforth has brought something for ye in case we did find a runner down in these parts. Show him, Danny. Danforth reached into his jacket and pulled out what could only be described as plastic skin that looked form-fitted for a child. He held it out on display for me, outstretched at the arms. Its shining bald head warbled for a moment before folding forward. He flicked his wrists and it tottered over the other way. Besides its sheen, the skin could pass for that of a real child's, save for there were no ears, and the nose, although its shape was in place, had its nostrils sealed over. The sockets where the eyes were supposed to be were instead lidded with translucent little hollow bulbs. The only true opening on the head was at its mouth. Although no real living child was inside, a very real sorrow lived on its face. It was the face of despair. It was the face of the hopeless. See, Dan here is a bit of an artist when it comes to putting skinnies on. He doesn't even need a popper. He's a bit bigger than we expected, but I've saw him once fit a girl near 17 or so, hands high. And a plump one too, she was. I'm sure we can get you to squeeze in. You know? It's funny, we brought one in close to ye age just today, and he's due for a... I wailed, tripped over my own feet, and fell back to the wet stone. I scrambled back down the walkway away from them, back toward the dead end. It was nothing but the flailing of terror. The water was the only place I could go. I knew I was as good as caught if I went in there. The two things were silent now. The rings of stilled fire in their eyes glinted at me, cold now, and with predatory calculation. They were going to move in for the grab. I knew I had to act now. Think, Angelo. Think, goddammit. The coin I had put in my pocket with the insignia of the double image of the splayed man and the tree, that both Billy and that card had told me to hold on to, suddenly felt heavy in my pocket. It will be your light in the dark? I clasped it through my shirt. It sang to me in a way I can't quite explain, almost like the sweet ring of a tuning fork. An idea. The lantern, the one that calls himself Bircher, is holding. It looks like it's an oil lamp of some kind. Breaking it and burning them with it was a stupid thought. It was also probably going to get me nowhere, but it was the only thought I had. And the coin had reassured me. Bircher, who was now just within reach of my ankles, slipped suddenly on the wet slush that had formed from the disintegrated ladder and the puddle that had been beneath it. He toppled, and I lashed out like mad and grabbed the lantern, yanking it from his hand with 2 hard jerks. I swung it down on him in a long, plummeting arc with all the force I could conjure. The lantern exploded on his shoulder. Swaths of gluggish oil blanketed him, and an eager and hungry flame chased it, unfurling and growing ravenously until the creature was in a blaze. Inhuman roars of anguish wrung the walls of the shafts as he writhed. Danforth reached out to pull him toward the edge of the water, but must have gotten some of the oil on his arm. As he grabbed for the burning Bircher, the starved flame reached out and crawled up his sleeve, and then set the brim of his hat alight. He howled a tighter, but equally monstrous roar and flung the hat off. Suckling and attached to the top of his head was something in between a lamprey and a tadpole. Its tail coiled around his crown. He dropped the skinny he had been holding on display for me to shield the thing as he dove into the water. I ran past them as fast as my legs would take me, cutting tight and hard down the shaft they came from. I didn't know if it was the right move, but it didn't matter. I was running and they were burning, at least for now. A second, larger splash echoed behind me. I kept running, shaft after shaft, turn after random turn. I ran, hoping I didn't come to a dead end. Thankfully, I never did. The place looked to be some sort of grid of winding canals and connecting corridors, but the water always seemed to flow in the same general direction. Having felt I had lost them for a moment, I slowed down to think and catch my breath. It all just felt too real. My lungs burned, my legs burned. I felt my soiled skin from 3 days without a wash. As fucked up crazy as everything was, I was beginning to have a hard time buying my theory that this was the swan song of a junkie's brain, or a really fucked up bad dream. I wasn't craving a fix at all, which puzzled me. But everything else in the sensory department seemed to be working just fine, seemed to have shown up for work. Although endless questions still swam around in my head, I still needed to find a way out. Making sense of it all would have to come later. I eventually made out the faint light of an opening at the end of a canal I had been following for some time, careful to zigzag into an adjacent corridor, and then snake my way back across again in the hopes it would keep those fucking monstrosities off my trail. The static hiss of cascading water grew louder as I kept moving. A spillway, a glimmer of hope lit in me, but still had no idea where Bircher and Danforth were, and the steel wires of terror were still wound tight in me. But if I'm honest, a part of me thought it felt good. It was a sharpness, a quick scanning decisiveness I'd always harbored but hadn't felt since I had given myself my all-consuming mistress of ruin. It was an old friend I had missed dearly. As I drew nearer to the opening of the spillway, I noticed there were no more adjoined corridors or shafts I could use to hide if I heard the two things that hunted me. If I were at the precipice and those things happened to spot me and close in, I would have no choice but to go down into wherever it led. Either that or receive an appointment for a fitting with that skinny. And I had hurt them badly by the sound of it. If they were that nasty before, the way they were talking earlier implied there were more of them. Many more. I knew I was fucked anyway if I wandered the grid for too long in this ungodly canal system. I decided I was going to go for it. And if there was any sort of path down, I was going to jump. If it looked like it was going to be an abrupt end to my squandered life, well, I'd never much liked myself to begin with. It's been a hard and lonely journey, and I have nobody to blame for it but myself. Besides, ending things on my own terms was going to be better than whatever they had planned for me. Unless there really is no death in Underhale, as Danforth had said. I pressed on, the dreary yellow glow from the incandescent lanterns breathing soft orbs of light along the dank stone walls. It was almost as if those walls wanted me to come to the spillway. Come and see what lies below. It's not like you have a choice anyway, Angelo. And besides, it's warm down there. I walked the stone side path up to the water's edge and placed a bracing hand onto the slimy stone frame to look below. A formation of stalactites blocked much of my view, but directly beneath me about 50 feet of water, lots of it. The canal poured out into a great cave lake of some kind. Glimmers of light from a source much brighter than anything that had been in the canal's dance on the caps of the unsettled water below. I tried my best to make out where its source was coming from, but I couldn't get any good view. Through a thin sliver of an opening in between two stalactites, I could make out blue twinkles of varying brilliance that blanketed the dark surface of the lake, too far out for the main source of light to reach. It reminded me of the night sky. Within echoes and growing in loudness from the hollows of the canals behind me, gnashed two furious voices I had hoped to never hear again. They were guttural and half-animal now, speaking to each other in a harsh language I didn't recognize at all. It sounded like they didn't know where I was just yet, but that was going to change fast. The water below looked deep enough to jump, and just to the right of the plunge pool along the cavern's wall looked to be a stone dock. Some kind of civilized life was down there for sure, and there was a good chance there were more of those awful things I was running from. The coin in my pocket felt heavy again and sang to me in its strange way, just like it did just before Bircher had slipped. It reassured me. It wanted me down there. It was keeping tabs. The terrible voices grew from some perpendicular shaft. They were getting close. I clasped the coin through my shirt for the second time, and I jumped down, descending once more, into the unknown murk below. The water was warm as a drawn bath. I resurfaced and gasped for air that was fat and heavy with dankness and decay. The smell was overwhelming. I grabbed for the dock and fought back a lurch. The thought of a swimming, tailed horror somewhere beneath me overwhelmed any fear I had of exposing my full body on the dock, and so I clambered up on all fours in breach. Dripping and bleary-eyed, I turned and looked before me. Carved into the massive domed cavern wall was a city. Highest on, at the cavern wall's crest, clung hundreds of crude dwellings that looked closer to the domed burrows of animals than any homes of men, each with a single circular hole in its center. The holes leered down like hateful singular eyes, blanketed in shadow and only visible due to their immense blackness in contrast with the hoary stone, just out of reach of light that reached upward from what looked to be some sort of light tower beneath them that stood proud at the city's center. I thought I could make out a tailed humanoid creature clamber from the wall into one of the dwelling's holes. I hid behind a pillar to my left that seemed to be aiding in supporting the weight of the overhang, and resumed my gazing. The tower, maybe 200 feet or so tall and engraved with intricate oxidized copper engravings that spiraled around it, provided nearly all the light for the city, save for the interiors of what looked like shops with drawn blinds that spread along a waterfront promenade. The shops, too, looked to be carved from the cave wall itself, with architecture that was at once chaotic and Euclidean, and stacked crowdedly. The buildings cradled the tower, wrapping it in a semicircle curvature, only leaving room directly behind the beaming pillar for a yawning and enormous tunnel to beckon onlookers into its blackness. Over the curved crown of the tunnel hung oxidized copper letterings, "All hail the Marigold, Marigold." I remembered the two creatures in the canals mentioning that name earlier. The great and black lake below the city extended out beyond the light hour's eminence, and the water twinkled out into the unknown dark with strange black buoys capped with blue lights that glowed those varying degrees of brilliance. I poked my head around the pillar for a quick glance up at where I had jumped from to see if Bircher and Danforth happened to be peering down at me. They still don't know I came down here, thank Christ. I had no idea where I was going to go from the small stone dock, but I still had time, and that was good. A door opened to one of the buildings near the promenade's wharf across the water from me. It was another of those sick abominations, slender like Danforth, except this one was bare-chested and wore form-fitted knee-length shorts, and on his head was what looked to be a black trash bag, rolled just above his mouth with 2 little eye holes cut out of it. The thing reached back into the darkness of the doorway, and with a rough and hateful yank by the neck pulled out a boy that looked to be about 16. It must have been the boy Bircher had mentioned. He was the thing's prisoner. There was no fight in him. Once, maybe, but the hanging, solemn face he wore told a tale of a spirit that had been broken some while ago. He looked like the saddest boy in the world. The creature guided him with a series of intermittent tugs over to a large metal contraption at the water's edge, an amalgamation of crude copper levers and glazed wood, with the vague outline of a Vitruvian man at its center and a mess of copper piping behind it. Above the contraption was a wooden platform, where a pile of long black tubes lay. A ladder bolted to the side of the platform reached down to the wharf's stone basin. Several more of the amphibian men emerged from the same doorway the boy and his captor had come from. 2 of them climbed the ladder to the platform, and the others began cranking on levers and pulleys from behind the contraption. The boy's captor dragged him finally in front of the copper calamity and lifted him parallel to the silhouette of the Vitruvian man. The others reached through the piping and latched his limbs into place, and then his entire body, with restraints that clasped from the sides rather than wrapping around his appendages as normal bonds would. A small noise left the boy's mouth, and he made a face that would have produced tears if there were any left, but there weren't. The well had been depleted. All that was left was a face that knew that his prayers to be saved weren't going to be answered. One of the amphibian men from behind cranked and jimmied away at a few pieces of copper, and several long blades unfolded in front of the boy, along his limbs and vertically down the center of his body. He closed his eyes and murmured something before a final crank sent them gliding through the boy's skin with a single quick glint. Another creature cranked away, and jointed copper rods with prongs on end reached through to the boy's seamed skin like horrible mechanical spider legs. And with a harsh popping noise, the skin departed from his body in a single motion, pulled through the back of the machine, and out of sight. The noise the boy made still haunts my ears in the quiet of the night. I cupped my hand to my face to hold in a scream and folded into the ground behind the pillar. Tears poured from me. I was in hell. I had to be. The boy never once lost consciousness. Not from being skinned alive and not from what came after. One of the creatures on the platform took hold of a strange pneumatic gun that had 3 copper claws on the end of its barrel and shoved them into the boy's eye sockets one by one, pulling the trigger and taking the eyeball in its entirety. His shrill screams returned. The thing then thumbed dark red balls into the boy's sockets that were slightly bigger than the eyes that had resided there before. I clawed for him in the air helplessly as they mutilated his body, but the 150 feet of water between us. The creatures, there was nothing I could do but watch. More cranking, and his hands were pulled down to his sides. The amphibian man that had originally dragged him out from the building pulled out what Bircher and Danforth had called a skinny, and stretched its mouth to fasten it around a pentagon-shaped ring that was fixed on the contraption beneath the skinless, eyeless boy. God, he looked like a monster. Another crank and the ring slid upward, replacing the skin that had just been taken from him, just as tightly as his own had been, tighter even. The boy groaned as it wrapped his head snapped free from the ring. The deep red from the balls where his eyes once were shone through the material around his sockets. The 2 creatures on the upper platform walked one of the long, black tubes upright and locked it into a guide frame above the boy. A webbed, clawed hand reached from behind and pulled his head back. As they guided the tube down to the boy's mouth, I lost all sense of self-preservation and wailed in horror, in desperation. For the boy, for myself. Ah, God, no more, God damn you, I cried out from across the water. The creatures stopped what they were doing, and mild, twinkling surprise danced in the golden rings of their eyes as they studied me. With no point in hiding any longer, I stood out on the stone dock across from them, naked to the gaze of anyone and anything that cared to look from the God-forsaken promenade of that God-forsaken city. After a long, inquisitive look, the creature with the black bag over his eyes smiled with that same awful mess of needle-like teeth and gums. He began laughing a horrible horse laugh as something squirmed from beneath the bag on his head. The others on the popper joined him in laughter. Pairs of golden rings peered through the blinded windows of the shops on the promenade. Pairs of golden rings peered from the little black holes of the cave wall dwellings on high. Hundreds and hundreds of eyes peered down at me, accompanied by a massive swell of hooting, sinister laughs that sounded neither animal nor human. The two creatures on the upper platform of the popper held their gaze on me with sardonic smiles as they hammered the tube into the mutilated boy's throat, wedging his face permanently upward and sky-gazing. His neck swelled as the tube sunk down. I cursed them, in horror, in rage, in despair, and they laughed harder. The workers stapled the new skin around the boy's hyperextended mouth to the buoy. They unlatched his limbs, and one of the boy's trembling hands reached up toward the tube he had been gorged with beyond all comprehension. Aside from his arms, the upper half of his body was now stiff and immobile. One of the creatures on the upper platform screwed a light bulb into the top of the tube, while another from the ground gave a final crank. Everything was set free. Those on the ground carried him over to the water and threw him in. With new eyes, I looked once more at all the black tubes in the water, with those countless blue lights. The denizens of the city of Underhill were still laughing. They were children, and there's no death in Underhill. The low, mournful wail of a horn cut all the insidious laughter out of the air. Metal rattled open somewhere from the blackness above, and then I heard the dry rustling of wings. Insect wings, swarms of them. Out of the darkness above, I saw a large, strange black beetle land on one of the blue bulbs that were brightly lit. Its abdomen swelled and illuminated with the light as the bulb dimmed to a faint whisper. Aglow, the beetle spread its wings again and departed toward the tunnel behind the light tower. Thousands of its brothers and sisters followed, each taking their own and leaving only dim whispers in the dark. The weight of it all had become too much, and I fell to my knees. I realized I was just so tired of everything. I belonged down there in that fetid water. Not those children. I watched the horde fill the gaping maw of the tunnel with blue brilliance when something came awake in my mind. She was like a budding flower, growing from a place in between the real world and the imagined. Dozens of orange, teardrop-shaped petals spread open, their edges ruffled and tinged red. They looked somewhat like the petals of a marigold. It was her. The horn had awakened her, and roused from her slumber, she saw me and planted herself in my mind. The woeful cry of a woman echoed from the depths of the tunnel. Each strange petal unfurled, one by one, and every one of them showed me things that both broke my heart and filled me with utter horror. I saw the mirror of a woman with a beautiful mind, a rich mind filled with worlds endless. I saw her love for the creatures in the city of Underhill, and then I saw that love sour and turn to hatred. She was at once their mother, their goddess, their prisoner. She had found something in the dark, something that seemed like it could blur the lines between her mind and the real, and she had paid for it. The price took the sight from her. The price took her beautiful mind, and she became a prisoner to her own creations. And blind and in the dark, they fed her with the young, dreaming minds of despair. And she hated it. And yet she needed it more, for she could not overpower her insatiable hunger. And she was growing. Another mournful cry from the tunnel. She showed me more. A daughter. Her last light in the dark. And she both hated and loved that light with the bleeding heart of despair. Because the daughter could set her free from it all. But the mother's hunger was all-consuming. 2. Heavy splashes in the water brought me back to my surroundings. The countless eyes that lived in the creatures' heads across the water still trained their golden rings upon me. But the smiles beneath them had been replaced with a blankness, a knowing that I had seen their mistress, their marigold, their captive mother. Bircher and Danforth emerged from the water and hoisted themselves onto the dock. Undoubtedly, they had heard all the laughter. Danforth, now shirtless but otherwise unharmed, was holding the flimsy and partially melted plastic fedora to his head, shielding the thing that was attached to him from view. Bircher's jacket had been grafted to his body in an amorphous mangle of white flesh and melted olive-colored vinyl. One of his eyes looked as though it had burst from the heat. Bircher seethed. "Look at you now. You're proper fucked. You've seen what we do to good little boys and girls. And look at what you've done to me." In my head, I felt the marigold both hated Bircher and yearned for what he had planned for me. "See her in that noggin, don't you?" he said with a curled lip that flickered into a hateful smile before reverting back to a pain-filled grimace. "You'll feed her like the rest for all time, even when this place can't hold her any longer." Spittle flung as he laughed hoarsely, that heavy feeling of the coin in my pocket again, and then something else in my mind. Something on the edge of the imagination like her, but much older. A pair of sanguine eyes like two dim red stars in the abyss pulled the marigold down into obscurity. I could feel her shock, and then her rage as it overwhelmed her. She hated the eyes, she feared them. A third cry from the tunnel now filled with the shrill fury and hatred of the helpless upon seeing their enemy. With blinding speed, the coin tore through my pocket and halted abruptly between Bircher and Danforth and me. They paused for a moment, puzzled at what hung so still in the air before them. The coin began to gyrate, slowly at first, as pieces of the man and the tree on its face folded and unfolded at different angles, until the edges of the coin didn't resemble a coin at all. The dim red stars in my mind tremored as the thing in the air sped faster and faster, until the eyes lit sockets that belonged to the face of a dark and monstrous wolf. It was beautiful. It was dread incarnate. It snarled with fury, presenting a wreckage of teeth too great and horrible to belong to anything of the world we know. The face tremored along with the eyes with a mad, wild intensity. "Now you see," it whispered into my mind with the voice of a man. The gyrating thing that was once the coin was now spinning so fast, gales of wind blew my hair and clothes, and flapped the vinyl that had been melded onto Bircher's skin. The marigold cried out in rage from the tunnel, and Bircher lunged forward. From the coin, a quick pop of red light flared as Bircher approached, sending both he and Danforth into a mess of organs. Pieces of them flung through the air in all directions. Red beams in wide arcs began emanating from it, as if it were scanning the dread city. The countless creatures on the promenade of the city of Underhale, those who had been filled with such horrible laughter moments before, now bayed with rage. Those working the popper charged for the water to close in on me. Those up in their dwellings crawled out of those black holes they had peered from with their gold-ringed eyes and descended the cave walls and the buildings like swarms of insects. The wolf in my mind never said another word. He just seethed and tremored with what I could only interpret with my human mind as complete and utter madness. He opened his mouth, and a sanguine glow that matched his eyes pulsed from the depths of his throat. As the coin whirled, and the beams sent their red arcs to touch every edge of the dread city they could, vocalic pulses of that sanguine light began strobing from it. Those same strobes emanated from the wolf in my head, permeating through my very bones, through my very soul. The marigold loudened her hateful cries of despair, and I replied with my own. Into the horrible light I screamed with madness. The creatures were closing in. The light pulsed faster, and I screamed louder. In a final moment, the mad snarl of the wolf curled into a toothy, knowing grin, and then nothing but a flash of that blinding red, followed by empty darkness. A driver had spotted me near the frigid water's edge of Red River in Cedar Hill, Missouri, underneath a bridge. I was over 330 miles from Chicago. When the police got to me, I had been half frozen to death, although I don't remember anything from then or the next few days afterward. My family was just as confused as I was about how I had gotten there, but were mostly just grateful that I had been found alive. Once the hospital released me, my mom and dad welcomed me home under the condition I go to an inpatient rehab first, to which I agreed. My old mistress had departed from me, gone forever, and never was coming back. But there was no way to explain to them the things I had seen, the things I had experienced in the city of Underhale, and their mistress. I'd never truly seen her, but I had felt her despair, her yearning. I had felt her growing in the dark somewhere at the end of that tunnel, fed by the dreams of children driven insane from suffering. That was 8 months ago, after I went through the motions of inpatient rehabilitation that I knew I didn't need but nevertheless owed my family. I moved in with my parents for a short time until I got a job working at a local factory to save up enough money for my own place. While living in their house, I noticed a 5-part series of books on an oak bookshelf in their reading room that was collecting dust in the corner. They were titled The Narrator Chronicles. Between the H and all the surreal horror that had been occurring in that godforsaken alley, I couldn't remember what it had said on there. Tainted. The Narrator Chronicles. No one else had been home to hear my pitiful wail of terror as it dawned on me. I stood trembling in the hallway for what felt like an eternity, just staring at the door to the reading room. In there, at the very least, was a memory of my own horror, a tainted dream of misspent potential and hopelessness and suffering. But maybe it was more than that. All hail the marigold. The words had been in my mind nearly every moment since I'd woken up in that hospital in Missouri. Although I never truly saw her, I knew her very well. She had been a slave to her own yearning just as I had been. She had hated herself for the unimaginable torment she'd brought upon those poor people, and yet took what was left of their minds with gluttony and ecstasy in exchange for their eternal despair. Because there is no death in Underhale, not for us. I crumpled into a ball in the hallway, knowing I had to eventually see the books more closely for what was left of my own sanity. The air thickened, and I thought I could see 2 dim red stars just out of my sight, but when I would look there would be nothing. I felt that wolf and his awful, knowing smile. He wanted me to see down there in the dark, and I did. And now he wanted me to see what was in that reading room. After a while, I made my way in and picked up the book with the Roman numeral 3 on its spine, the only one that was loose. I couldn't bear to grab any of the spines with more than a delicate pinch of my fingers. I pulled it out and studied the cover. The Narrator Chronicles, the Copper City Book, 3 by G.B. Underhill. On its cover was a picture of a subterranean city, with a wharf not unlike the one I had seen in my drug-fueled insanity. The city buildings and the rest of the cave wall, however, looked very different. The shop windows harbored fish and goods that seemed to be for sale, and the promenade was lined with happy human citizens going about their day. The light tower in the city's center gleamed as its copper engravings sang with its light, weaving around the pillar in intricate detail. Hundreds of people stood around its base, and on a platform was a pale, muscular, and beautiful woman donned in barbarian armor. Long, silver hair flowed from her head, and strange tattoos covered her from foot to neck. There was no tunnel beckoning from behind the light tower. There were no oxidized copper letterings hailing that dread mother and her city of horror. There were no tailed amphibious creatures posing as men, and there were no glowing beacons of lost hope and despair. The blurb read, "The mighty Guinevere, the greatest of the fabled Norarden warriors, whose strange and mysterious inking spring alive to come to their aid in battle, has returned to the home of her birth, the Copper City. And things are good for a time. Things are peaceful. Things are just. But war and strife are entwined within the destinies of each Noradrin, and the path they lead winds only under the guise of free will, for they are the eternal protectors from the greed and dominion of the engineers. Defeated and exiled to the far reaches of the subterranean waterworks of her lost city, Guinevere embarks on the long and harrowing journey back home to free her land from the clutches of her own mother. Her strange and wonderful magic could not save them before, but with a new, uncanny group of friends she finds along the way, will she prevail? It was a young adult fantasy series. My sister used to love reading fantasy books when she was in her teenage years, and I must have picked it up at some point a long time ago and not remembered it, I'd thought. But when? It was the last thing I would ever do. Those fucking monsters Bircher and Danforth had mentioned this Guinevere. Something about how the Marigold had the daughter's chair waiting for her upon her return. I read through the book with pouring cold sweat and a feverish need that had rivaled the peak of my heroin addiction. There were similarities, but the city, the engineers, none of it was what I had seen. And never a mention of any Marigold. Never any mention of those creatures, save for a small group of nomadic hunters the main characters cross paths with during their journey back. The series was, more or less, just an epic power fantasy meant for teenage girls. I was more confused about it all than I had ever been. This wasn't something I would have ever read growing up, and I didn't remember my sister ever mentioning this series to me. And that horrible, acrid-smelling man with the strange skin, Billy, and that disembodied voice with him, and that wolf that felt older than time itself, and both so beautiful and so horrifying I've never been able to cement a clear image in my head. I eventually did get my own apartment and was supposed to be planning to finally finish taking my oath and get licensed to practice law, if I could convince the board I was fit to do so. But Underhale had consumed me, and I fell into a deep obsession. The author was semi-well known within the niche she wrote in, but she didn't have any adapted work on television that I could find or any real reason I might have passively seen or heard the story, other than it resting on my parents' bookshelf for years. It turned out that G.B. Underhill was a private person and had used a pen name for everything she had ever written. The picture she used on the back of her books was AI generated. After digging on the internet, I eventually found her. Her name is Galilee Baker from Cedar Hill, Missouri. The small town of 1,600 people I had been found in under that bridge, 300 miles from where I had last been seen and near frozen to death. Some threads online suggested she was terminally ill and was spending the last several weeks of her life with her family and her daughter, to whom she had dedicated the Narrator Chronicles and everything else she wrote. I'm planning to make my way there to talk to her, to try to, well, I don't know. Maybe I am insane. It would make more sense than anything, and in all honesty, I'd welcome it as a relief. But when they found me under that bridge, not 3 miles from GB Underhill's home, it had been on December 13th, 9:27 p.m., only 1 hour after the cold blast of the decade had hit Chicago. The little junkie den I had been in had made the news. Every one of them had frozen to death. An image leaked online and was used as a scathing indictment on the failings of the city and its handling of the homeless. It showed their dead faces, frozen in silent screams, just the same as the screams that hung on them when Billy entered that alleyway, forever changing my life. I'm leaving in the morning for Cedar Hill. I must get to Galilee Baker before she's gone. I have no idea what I'm going to say, but I have to believe she knows something about all of this. Those dim red stars have never left my back since they reappeared in my parents' hallway. I can feel his sardonic smile beneath them as they burn low and sanguine, at once stern and wanton, and amused at my ignorance. And those eyes would have left me alone long ago if he were done with me. He showed me, and I saw. Someone just knocked at my door. The acrid smell of ammonia is burning my nose, even though I'm all the way in my living room. It has to be Billy and his friend around his neck, coming to finally tell me more. And thank God, whatever God is, maybe God is him. I've spent 20 years trying to understand what happened to my sister that autumn, and I'm no closer to an answer. Sometimes I wonder if that's the point, that some experiences aren't meant to be understood from the outside, only witnessed. Like watching someone you love have a conversation in a language you don't speak, except the other participant is, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Emma and I were staying at our grandmother's farmhouse in western Maine that October, helping clear it out after she passed. The property had been in our family for generations, perched on the edge of an apple orchard that had gone wild decades ago. The trees were gnarled and untamed, their branches reaching toward the house like arthritic fingers. We'd been close once, Emma and I, but life has a way of putting distance between people. She'd moved to Seattle for work while I'd stayed in Boston. We saw each other at holidays, traded occasional texts, but that was it. When we inherited the farmhouse together, it was the first time we'd spent more than a day in each other's company in years. The first few days were ordinary enough. We sorted through old photographs, argued about which pieces of furniture were worth keeping, and remembered summer visits when we were kids. But something changed after we found the box of letters in the attic. They were love letters, written to our grandmother in 1943 by a young man named Thomas Wheeler. He'd grown up on the neighboring farm and enlisted after Pearl Harbor. The last letter was dated 3 days before he died in Italy. We knew our grandmother had eventually married our grandfather in 1946, but she'd never mentioned Thomas. Emma became obsessed with the letters. She'd sit in the old rocking chair by the kitchen window reading them over and over. I noticed she started taking walks in the orchard at dusk, something she'd always been too scared to do when we were kids. She said the light was perfect then, whatever that meant. The first time I saw her talking to herself among the apple trees, I didn't think much of it. We all process grief differently, and maybe this was her way of mourning our grandmother. But then the conversations became more frequent and more animated. She'd laugh at jokes I couldn't hear, gesture to empty air, turn her head to listen to words that weren't there. "Who are you talking to out there?" I asked one evening as she came in, cheeks flushed despite the autumn chill. "Thomas," she said, as casual as if she were telling me she'd been on the phone with a friend. "He's been showing me how the orchard used to look before it went wild. Did you know there used to be beehives down by the stone wall?" I checked the local history records later. There had been beehives there, but they'd been removed in 1950. There was no way Emma could have known that. The night before we were supposed to leave, I woke to the sound of laughter floating up from the orchard. It was past midnight, and a heavy fog had rolled in from the hills. I found Emma's bed empty and ran outside, terrified she'd gotten lost in the mist. I found her in the center of the orchard, dancing. Not just swaying or twirling, but properly dancing, like someone at a formal ball. Her arms were positioned as if held by an invisible partner, and she moved with perfect grace through the complicated steps of what looked like a waltz. Her face was radiant with joy, but her expression made my blood run cold. She was looking up at someone tall, someone I couldn't see. "Emma," I called out, my voice shaking. "Emma, please come inside." She turned toward me, but her eyes seemed to look through me rather than at me. "Can't you hear the music?" she asked. "It's the same song they played at the harvest dance in '43. Then she turned back to her invisible partner and continued dancing, humming a tune I'd never heard before. I stood there in the fog, watching my sister dance with some entity, and I realized something that haunts me to this day. I wasn't afraid of whatever she was dancing with. I was afraid of the space between us, the gulf between her reality and mine, growing wider with every step of that ethereal waltz. Emma moved into the farmhouse permanently after that week. She restored the orchard, planted new trees alongside the old ones, and even reinstalled beehives by the stone wall. She never married, but she was never alone. Sometimes when I visit, I catch her smiling at empty chairs or laughing at unheard jokes. She seems happy, happier than I've ever known her to be, but I can't help wondering about that space between us, about the things she sees that I never will, about how two people can stand in the same orchard, breathe the same air, share the same blood, and yet live in entirely different worlds. I've learned to live with not understanding. After all, love letters aren't meant to be read by anyone except their intended recipient. Maybe some hauntings work the same way. I'll admit it, I've always been a little soft when it comes to animals. I'm the type to break for squirrels, slow for stray cats, and swerve for deer. Growing up, my mother used to say I was better off being around animals than people, something my wife has come to echo for the last 10 years. Can you blame me? Animals don't have the same anger in their heart as people. They don't have the same control over the world. Plus, they're cute. I'll do anything to make sure they come out safe on the other side. Last night, that instinct nearly got me killed. I was driving home from my parents' place. It was late, and the stretch of highway between their town and mine was lonely, just an endless ribbon of asphalt cutting through dark woods. My headlights carved pale tunnels through the night, and the radio hummed low, a half-hearted attempt to stave off the eerie silence. "Carry on, keep fighting," I crooned, voice barely loud enough to be considered singing. My fingers drummed against the steering wheel, up with the sun sharp as lightning. Then I saw it, a small, hunched shape scuttling across the road. An armadillo. They're like little tanks, you'd think they'd be indestructible. But I knew they ended up on the side of the road, minus their heads more often than not. I jerked the wheel to the left, muttering a panicked "Jesus Christ" as the car veered onto the shoulder. I didn't miss. The sound of the impact was sharp, like a rock striking metal. My heart sank as I straightened out the wheel, glancing into the rearview mirror. My heart sunk, tears already springing to the corners of my eyes. I expected to see the poor thing crumpled on the pavement, but it wasn't. The armadillo was standing, its squat body unfurled, and for a moment, it looked almost too big, as if the impact had knocked loose some hidden, monstrous version of itself. Its head turned toward me, eyes glinting like polished marbles in the glow of my brake lights. The tears dried before they could hit my cheeks. My mouth followed suit. Then it moved. Number it ran, straight toward me. Shit, shit, shit! I slammed on the gas, heart hammering in my chest. The car lurched forward, tires screeching. I told myself it was some kind of bizarre reflex, like chickens flapping after their heads are chopped off. But the thing wasn't stopping. In the mirror, I watched it hurtle down the middle of the road, its legs moving far too fast for something its size. Its body shimmered oddly in the moonlight, shell wet and a dark stripe down the center, like it was cracked. No matter how fast I went, it stayed in the mirror. Fear curdled my stomach. My fingers gripped the steering wheel so tight it turned my knuckles white. When my speedometer hit 70, I told myself there was no way it could keep up. And yet there it was, barreling after me with a dogged, unnatural persistence. Dark pines blurred outside my windows. I tried to focus on the road ahead. The last thing I needed was to wrap myself around a tree because I was too busy watching a goddamn zombie armadillo. Except it wasn't in the rearview mirror anymore. I slowed down, just a little. Still nothing. Relief started to push up through the fear. Was it gone? I started to slow down. There was cold sweat on the back of my neck, staining the once crisp collar of my dress shirt. Thank God. But then there was a sound. A scrape. It came from the rear of the car, faint but unmistakable. Something sharp scraping against metal. I barely had time to process this when something slammed against the trunk, hard. The car fishtailed. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the wheel, trying to keep it steady. Another thud followed, this one louder, closer. The car shook violently, and suddenly I felt the back end dip. Weight, pulling it down. The scrape of metal, repetitive, like something climbing. Number no, 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 no. I floored it, heart pounding in my ears. The car roared, and I prayed it would be enough to shake whatever the hell was back there. No such luck. The skitter of claws on metal overpowered the low tunes from the radio. It was on the roof now. I screamed and swerved hard to the right. The car tilted, nearly going off the road before I corrected it with another hard swerve. For a moment, everything was silent except for the rasp of my breath and the pounding of my pulse. Then I heard it again. Scraping. Claws dragging along the roof, slow and deliberate. I didn't think. I couldn't. I just slammed the brakes. The tires screeched, the car jolting to a violent stop. I heard a heavy thud as something flew off the roof and hit the pavement behind me. I didn't look back. Instead, I hit the gas and sped off, not daring to check the mirror again. This time, the armadillo didn't make it onto the car. When I got home, I parked in my driveway and sat there shaking for what felt like hours. I couldn't bring myself to let go of the steering wheel, let alone get out of the car. Not until the first light of dawn started to creep over the horizon. Even then, when I finally stepped out, I didn't linger. My eyes kept darting to the rose bushes lining the walkway, to the dewy grass that grew tall at the base of my neighbor's privacy fence. Had it followed me? I didn't think so. Not until I got to the front door. In the dirt near the cement step, there was a trail of long, thin claw marks and the faint outline of tiny armored footprints. Something wet and dark was caked to stone. I went inside, called my wife. She was out of town on a business trip. Sat down here. I just want to know, has anyone else seen something like this? And do I need to be worried that the armadillo is going to keep coming back? Ever since I was young, my dad talked about going on a space mission, about orbiting the Earth and gazing into infinity, about knowing what it felt like to be one of the few people on Earth who were blessed with the opportunity to be completely off-planet. The day he started working for NASA was one that has been living rent-free in my head ever since. A core memory, if you will. I think I was about 7, and the look of childlike giddiness and pride when he was on the phone receiving the good news was like seeing a whole new person. Gone was my stern father, who just in the last hour had politely scolded me for not cleaning up spilled juice in the kitchen, and replacing him was a little kid in a grown body getting the best news of their life. It felt like he was almost on my level in that moment, like he was just any other nerdy kid on the playground at school. From there on and over the next few years, he worked his way up the ladder, starting as an assistant engineer and eventually was considered one of the most valued members of his team, making him eligible for the training programs for honest-to-God space missions. And as I'm sure you can imagine, he did everything in his power to ensure that this process started as soon as possible. He began training within a couple of months. I was around 15 at the time he started going through training, and I'd never seen him so happy and driven and exhausted in all of my life. He was filled with joy and determination, and despite what I may have told you at the time, it inspired me a lot as a teenager. Even if my initial reactions were eye-rolling and cringing like the shithead 15-year-old that I was. He was in training for about 3 years, and after that he was off to the races and was readying up to deploy on his first space mission. His childhood dream was coming true, and in a way, so was mine. I mean, I'd emotionally invested so much in his career since I was so young that it felt like a win for me and really the whole family, too. This was an achievement that was widely celebrated, and I'll never forget the day I watched him shoot up into the stratosphere, clenching my mom's hand and comforting her, reassuring her. I'd turned 18 just a couple days prior and was definitely a little hungover, which kind of sucks in retrospect. But I still remember that experience as clear as day, even with the groggy remnants of my indulgent birthday party. The details of the mission were totally classified, as I'm sure you'd expect. However, this did seem especially secretive. Maybe it is commonplace for all employees to be under strict NDAs that forbid them sharing basically any information outside of going on a space mission. And I could tell this was killing my dad because he just wants to talk about it, all of it, but he couldn't. So we had no idea what he was doing up there, or how long he would be up there for. The space mission lasted approximately 4 years, which was greatly longer than I think any of us expected. In that time, I'd gone to college and dropped out of college and had a mini crisis of identity and purpose. I'd started a relationship and that relationship ended, and he even missed the family dog's passing. It was difficult, as I said, we didn't really expect him to be gone so long. However, I'd never expect that the last time I hugged my dad goodbye before he boarded, that it was the last time I'd truly recognize him as my father. Maybe my expectations were too high, but when Dad finally came back, I was expecting this hyperactive, info-dumping menace to tear through the house with stories of the mission and tales of grandiose shifts in his perspective of life and the universe at large. But instead, he was withdrawn. Very withdrawn. For the first week, it felt pretty normal. I mean, the guy had to reacclimate to life on Earth after living in zero gravity for so long. And I'd read up about this, and apparently the transition process can be a bit rough for some, especially first-timers, and especially for long missions, more than 1 to 2 years. But after a month, it was becoming concerning. He barely ate the way he used to. He barely spoke to me or my mom, and he spent a lot of time in his study just typing on an old-school typewriter. He never let us get anywhere near his study, let alone the documents that he was producing, and when asked about it, he got tense, aggressive, and really defensive. But not in the way that made you think he was protecting his own privacy. It was more like a fear response, like he was trying to protect us from what he was writing, and the idea of us having any inkling to what it was seemed to really terrify him in a way that made it hard to even recognize the kind of person he was now. This nervous wreck of a man had replaced my dad. I mean, Dad's whole personality changed. He wasn't outgoing or bubbly or excitable or even passionate, but nervous, secluded, antisocial. He barely even spoke to my mom, and I could tell it was starting to wear her thin. She'd even confided in me about it after a couple of glasses of red one night, asking me if he'd spoken to me much or at all. Sadly, she was way more in the dark about it all than I'd realized. What the hell happened up there? What was he typing? Did he see something? What was the mission? These are all questions that burned in my mind, and it got to the point that, against my better judgment, I would begin to investigate this for myself, to try and snoop around his study and get an idea of what the hell was going on. At this point, it wasn't even about the excitement of getting a scoop of details regarding the mission, although that would be awesome, but about finding a way to help my dad be himself again. This was the worst thing I could have done. It was late one night around 1 a.m. Mom had gotten upset with him, and they had a light argument, and he was on the couch downstairs, which gave me a unique opportunity to try and sneak into his study while he slept. I'm almost certain he kept it locked at night, but I'd been watching a lot of YouTube videos on how to pick locks, and I felt somewhat confident in pulling it off. I remember the adrenaline coursing through my body as I tiptoed to the study, something that felt a little juvenile for a 22-year-old, kind of like sneaking out of the house to go drink beers with your buddies or something. As I approached the door, I pulled out my makeshift lockpick, a repurposed hair clip, and started to very gently and as quietly as possible work the inner mechanisms of the lock. Every little scrape of metal felt like it was louder than a stadium concert, and the willpower to focus enough to steady my shaking hands was bordering on being more demanding than what I was able to take. But by a force of skill or just dumb luck, I actually got it unlocked. It surprised me. I exhaled slowly through my nose and opened the door to the study. Slowly, steadily, as to not irritate the dry hinges and cause a groan or a croak to echo through the house like an alarm. Once the door was open, I started to gently walk towards the typewriter and realized that I'll need to use my phone's torch to see anything. It was in the middle of the night after all. So I pulled out my flashlight and illuminated the desk area, and what I saw sent shivers down my spine. Blood. On the typewriter keys and on the desk, on the papers he'd removed and stored in a pile. By the looks of it, he'd been typing with such vigor his fingers had began bleeding, but that didn't stop him. Tiny shards of fingernails littered the desk around the typewriter, and some of the bloodstains looked older, like this has been happening the whole time he was back. It was what I saw in the papers that really scared the shit out of me. It's hard to even explain it, but it was pages and pages of numbers, various numbers. Mostly ones and zeros, but plenty of others too. No particular sequences or patterns, just lots of numbers in seemingly random order, like he was typing in a completely different language. It may sound odd or maybe even silly, but something about seeing those numbers like that, and the sheer amount of pages he'd written of them, Felt like I was witnessing something unspeakably dark that I was not supposed to. Like my dad's aggressive reluctance to talk about it was completely justified and fully necessary. It was this primitive feeling that bubbled and boiled in my gut and made me feel sick, and I began to disassociate a little before the light switched on. Dad was standing in the doorway and he was fucking petrified. Not even angry or disappointed, but petrified. He was more scared than I'd ever seen him, and without missing a beat, he asked me, "How much of it did you read?" This question seemed to kind of echo around in my head, like I'd understood what he said, but I was almost experiencing it in third person, like I was slowly detaching from my body. "Jackson, please, how much?" Suddenly I was able to snap myself out of this odd and almost ethereal feeling mental state, and muttered a few lines, I think. Dad's expression dropped. He looked like he'd just been told the world had ended and everyone he loved was gone. "Jackson, I told you, you can't be in here, you can't. You weren't supposed to see this, any of this. I've been trying to protect you." His words trembled through my body like cortisol. The genuine tone of his voice told me that I didn't just make a silly and innocent mistake, but a grave one that didn't affect just me. The days after that were a blur. I don't remember exactly what happened, but I do remember sleeping a lot and having awful dreams. Dreams of lights emitting colors I'd never seen. Dreams of empty spaces stretching and morphing into hexagonal patterns that seemed to be both around and inside me all at once. I remember my dad sitting on my bed, crying and begging for my forgiveness, and my mother in the other room scream-crying into a pillow. It's impossible to tell what parts of these days were dreams or memories. When I woke up, my family wasn't home, and outside of the windows that were commonly drenched in sunlight was a shimmering silver material. It took me little time to realize that the house had been completely boarded off, like they're trying to contain a hazard. What the hell was going on? I took a couple more steps and agonizing pain shot through my legs and up my body into my skull. When I looked down, I was frozen in shock and disgust. My skin was wrinkly and yellow and weak, like I could draw blood by just lightly pinching it. It didn't even look like it was my body at all, like somehow over the last few days I'd swapped bodies with an old and dying man. My toes were clenched together and folding over each other a little, and my toenails were bloody, and underneath was yellow and black bruising. I tried to speak and call for someone, but the sound that came out of my mouth was a consistent mind-numbing tone that sent me into a dizzy spell that had me passing out and tumbling down the stairs. I awoke in a tent that was surrounded by scientists and doctors in full hazmat suits, and I haven't left since. In fact, as I type this, I've been told that I'll probably have to be here forever under watch as they study the changes in my body. Nobody will tell me exactly what's happened to me, and why I'm seemingly aging in different parts of my body, or why whenever I speak I emit that awful sound, to the extent that they have a muffle on me like I'm a rabid dog. Every day I feel myself growing weaker, like I'm deteriorating. My family hasn't been permitted to see me, and I have no idea where they are or if they're okay. I simply lie here and slowly die as they poke and prod me and analyze whatever the fuck I'm becoming. Writing this has been cathartic, and I'm grateful to them for allowing me to at least document my experience here, because based on the way my fingers have been slowly growing into themselves, I'm not sure how much longer I had this form of communication left in me. I've run out of paper towels, and the blood loss from typing is making me woozy. Dad, I'm sorry for snooping around. I should have listened. It started when my English lit professor told me to talk with him after class. I remember his hazel eyes boring into my soul when he asked me that, his wavy dark hair gently caressing the sides of his head. If it sounds like I had a crush on this guy, I did. Professor Fine was only 3 years older than me, a brand new addition to the King's Head campus. I took his class because I needed an easy English credit, but I stayed because I fell madly in love with him. I suspect many of his students felt the same, as the majority were glued to his every word. He had just sent out his first big assignment, what we did over the summer, as a fun little test of our budding prose. I wrote about the wild animal that terrorized our neighborhood but was vanquished by one brave little dog. When he asked me to stay after class, I suspected he wanted to congratulate me on my amazing story, and would maybe even like to discuss it over dinner. Perhaps just the two of us. I eagerly waited in my seat, feeling the jealous eyes of my classmates drive daggers into my heart. Mr. Fine stood at the back wall, a polite smile on his face as he nodded at the leaving masses. He even shook a few hands like he was a politician or something. He wore a thin brown overcoat with a white shirt underneath. He had a slender frame. I imagine he worked out a lot after class. He was tall as well. Almost reaching 7 feet, he would dwarf me just by standing next to me, which I found amusing to say the least. Soon it was just the two of us. I could feel the romantic tension in the air. In hindsight, I think I was projecting pretty heavily. He let out a deep sigh and strode over to me, reaching into his coat. Was it a flower? A love note? Some other romantic gesture I can't think of? He pulled out my paper and smacked in onto my desk. That's when he looked deed into my eyes and said the magic words. "I am very disappointed in this, Abby May." Wait, what? He noticed my scowl of confusion and continued. The assignment was what you did over the summer, not what you did in Fantasyland. Your style is also very generic, I have to say, riddled with contractions and self-inserting. He went on and on to say that while the scenario was intriguing, he felt it had missed the mark entirely. He said I had potential, but right now I was painfully mediocre. I was stunned, to say the least. Each word felt like he was bashing me in the head with a brick. I slumped over in my seat, on the verge of tears, frankly. "It did happen," I said softly amongst his criticism. He shook his head once more. "Look, I'm being too harsh here, but only because I think you have the potential. You're a very creative girl, Abby May, but this..." He spoke. "It's just silly." He went on to tell me he would expect a rewrite within a week, and it was okay if it was boring. After that, I dreaded going to Professor Fine's class. At every turn, he'd bark down my ideas and push me towards realistic standards with my essays. It was odd to me, an English professor so obsessed with realism and a disdain for something out there. I wasn't the only one in the class struggling with that, but I was his star pupil in mediocrity. I thought about complaining to the dean about him, but he wasn't inappropriate or anything like that. He was just a dick. There were a golden few he would lavish praise onto, and let me tell you, these people were dull. I mean, I know it is mean to say, but Jessica's first essay, it was literally titled, "I went to the mall and bought a new dress." It was just 5 pages of her talking about a dress, some silk strap-on eyesore, and she just went on and on and on. She used the word delicious to describe the thing 7 times. Yet Fine couldn't get enough of her. He praised her writing as the best in the class, and she tried to play coy, blushing and giggling and waving her dye job hair around like she owed the place. Was I jealous? Yes, of course. Fine had given me the ick, but a crush is hard to get over sometimes, which is why one can understand when I saw Jessica and Fine having lunch off campus the other day. Well, I just had to follow them. I had just left CVS to pick up some stuff when I eyed Fine and Jessica walking into some fancy Italian place. My heart skipped a beat as I noticed them hand in hand. Fine has a smile on his face that could tame a lioness, and Jessica fit the bill perfectly. In my stupor, I was nearly run over by someone, and I jumped off the side off the road. I still don't know why I did this outside of some petty whim, but after a moment I had snuck into the belly of the beast. I sat in the back corner, massive menu in hand as I peeked over it, eyeing the happy couple sitting about 7 tables away. A well-dressed waiter had already brought a bottle for the table. It looked red and expensive. I could make out a painting of a beautiful grape orchid on the label. Fine took the man's hand with a quick wink and a sly shake. The waiter came away and glanced at his hand, nodding at Fine. Jessica seemed impressed by this power move. Frankly, I thought it was a bit cliché. I stalked them for about an hour. They made pleasant dinner conversation and gorged themselves on salad and pasta. I ordered a meatball sandwich to keep my cover, my eyes still glued to them. What did Jessica have that enchanted him so? Her latest essay was about a dog she saw last week. It was 2 paragraphs long. All it did was wax and moan about she had wanted a dog but settled for a cat. The poor cat. Fine had said in front of the whole class that it had nearly brought him to tears. All that gushing made me want to dry heave. It occurred to me then that perhaps Fine was lying and even had ulterior motives. I was overjoyed at the fact that he might have been a secret sleaze. It didn't mean I wasn't a shitty writer. All it meant was he didn't find me attractive. What a dick. The check came and Fine coped a feel as he helped Jessica out of the chair. Her giggling would drive most men to madness. It grated on my ears like someone was driving nails into my head. I winced as the pair left the restaurant. I took out some change from my wallet and skipped out of there, following them some more. I stayed behind them on a snail's pace, darting behind cover like I was a spy on a mission. They didn't seem to come here in a car, and it was getting late. The evening sky enveloped the world above like an old friend. Fine quickened his pace, grabbing Jessica's shoulder as they turned a corner. I followed them just long enough to see that they had walked into a shady hotel. It was 2 stories tall and had cracked lime pane covering it. A man sat by the front entrance on a shitty plastic chair. He had a burly mustache and wore a floral shirt. Fine and Jessica skirted past the watch guy, who nodded in their direction, barely acknowledging them. This was a strange sight indeed. How long had this place even been here? Kinghead was a college town, barely any crime or anything like that outside the occasional drunken spat between frat bros. Seeing this unsightly building made my skin crawl, and I couldn't quite place the reason why. I crept towards the motel like a cat tiptoeing in the early night air. It had finally begun to cool up north. The crisp air pecked at my throat like icy shards of glass. I had almost made it inside when the guy at the door stuck his foot out. "Haven't seen you around here, hombre," the man said in a gruff accent. He barely looked at me. I could see now he had a small book in his hand. "Just wanted to check in. Need a break, you know." "You working? Doc gets a cut if you're using one of the rooms here," he explained. A knot formed in my stomach as the sleazy realization hit me. It suddenly hit me I was very much alone in a seedy part of town. I could feel steam pouring out of my beet-red face as I stammered and tried to get away from the doorman. "No, not really like that. Cool if you are, but not really my thing," I explained, backing away. Now the man looked up, eyeing me like a slab of veal. "Too bad, lot of guys dig on the red." He flashed me a perverted grin as I held down my lunch. "You want a room? It's $80 a night. Check out at dawn. I'm Jorge. I'm the keeper." He flashed his teeth at me, and I could make out at least 3 missing among his rotten set. "You aren't the doc," I said dismissively, my sense starting to return to me. Honestly, as I am writing this, I'm just coming across as a crazy stalker with a weird crush. It's not a good look, I'll admit that. I was getting ready just to wash my hands of the whole embarrassing affair when Jorge the keeper spoke up. "Nah, this here is Doc Fine's place. Inherited it from his folks. Seen better days, I know." Jorge grimaced. My heart skipped a beat at that. The hell was a college professor doing owning some rundown motel, let alone brining one of his students to it? "If you want to talk to him, you'll have to wait. He's, entertaining," Jorge crookedly said. A wave of disgust hit me like a tsunami. That knot in my stomach was doing backflips now. I was about to speak up when I heard a loud yelp echo out from inside the building. Jorge turned to meet it and then gave me the side eye. "See what I mean?" I rushed past him as he called back to me, but I was in Raider mode now. The lobby was dank and dry at the same time. The whiff of age-old musk hung in the air. The front desk was clear, and I could see coat racks and file cabinets behind it. I focused and tried to find where that cry had come from when I was met with a harsher shriek. It was coming from the back hall, all the way at the end. I sprinted down it, desperately trying to find the source. I don't know what I thought I was going to do. I had my pen taser on me, but that was about it. I heard a loud crash like a lamp breaking against the wall from the farthest room on my right. It was shut tight, my feet skittering off the ground as I stopped in front of the unassuming door. I froze in front of it, realizing that honestly, I was probably about to make a fool of myself. But that knot was strangling my intestines. I knocked on the door to no response. There was another muffled cry, like someone was struggling to breathe. I heard a whimpered no, and my heart froze as I recognized the voice's owner. I pounded on the door this time and shouted Jessica's name. I was ignored once more, but this time the door creaked open. I could hear better inside, a man grunting and a horrid gagging sound. I peeked in and my eye widened. Fine was on top of Jessica, shirtless. I could make out scratch marks on his well-toned back. I saw Jessica's face, black eyeliner streaked down as it turned a purple hue. She weakly slapped at Fine's face as she gasped for air, but he would not relent. He tightened his grip around her neck, and I could hear her windpipe start to crush in his grasp. Jessia darted her bloodshot eyes around the room until they landed on me. She raised a hand towards me as her eyes pleaded for help. I leapt back with a gasp and realized what I had to do. I dug around in my pocket for my taser and brought it out. It was thin and cheap, but when you jabbed it into someone, it stung like a son of a bitch. With a breath, I burst into the room and leapt onto Fine and jabbed the taser into his side. The zzzt of it rang through the air. Fine barely felt it. He released his grip from Jessica to try and pry me off his back. I was wailing on him, my fists digging into the side of his head like a wild spider monkey. He flexed and pushed me off with a thud. I collapsed to the ground in a heap as Fine stepped off the bed. He was breathing heavily and foaming at the mouth like a rabid wolf. I scrambled towards the door, my back facing the wall. I held up the taser like a loaded gun and aimed it at him. He loomed over me as he took a step towards me. Then he glanced back to Jessica. Her eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, a thin line of blood starting to pool out of her mouth. The knot began stabbing me in the guts like a sassy woman telling you, "I told you so." "It's unfortunate, Abby. You were never supposed to see this side of me." Fine waxed poetically. I backed myself against the door and primed myself to flee, still aiming my shaky hand at him. He took a cautious step closer and I practically hissed at him, jabbing the air with my taser. It may seem barbaric what I did here, but I promise you it all serves a grander purpose. Fine chuckled. Her mind was dull and witless, but her eyes, her beautiful baby blues. Not to mention her skin, so pure and porcelain, not a mark on it. Unlike some, he snarled. I pushed myself up, Fine towering over me like a raging bull. Flames of fury danced in his hazel eyes, and he wore the face of a raving loon. Yet his tone remained calm and collected. Stay back, or I swear I'll jam this thing so far down your throat you'll light up like a Christmas tree," I commanded. He chortled at this, my half-naked teacher. "Such an imaginative facade you put on, Abby May. It's why I didn't want to pick you. What part of you could I enjoy, could I use?" The creep leered at me, and I shuddered but held my head fast. "I suppose once I'm digging around in there, I'll find something of use." With that, he lunged at me, and I collapsed out the door into the hall with him on top of me. He gnashed his teeth at me like a wild dog, and he tried to wrap his hands around my throat. I could feel his rough hands start to tighten and choke as it became harder and harder to breathe. I gasped out for air as my vision began to blur. All I could see was Fine smiling at me, his deranged face looking down at me as he choked me. No, I wasn't going to die here, not like this. I used a free hand to search the filthy hotel floor. It smelled like vinegar and shame. Finally, I found my dropped taste and gripped it. With all my remaining strength, I jabbed the taser right in his eye socket. A dull blue light flashed in the hall and blood spurted onto my face, but I could breathe again. Fine collapsed on the ground next to me. He was screaming in agony. I scrambled to get up and ran down the hall. Jorge the keeper blocked my path, a worried expression on his face when he saw me. I brushed past him at light speed as he scurried over to the wailing, half-blind man on the floor. The next few hours were a blur of panic and adrenaline as I went back to my dorm, cell phone in hand. You might be surprised, but I didn't call the cops right away. How would I even explain it to start with? Oh, I was out stalking my teacher and he just happened to kill his date? Even if they believed me, he would have had plenty of time to get rid of the body. And he was missing an eye. He could easily try and turn it around on me like I was a jealous lover or something. I had choke marks, sure, but what would that prove? It would prove I was into kinky shit and became jealous and murdered Jessia and tried to kill Fine. So I sat there in my bed, spiraling for what seemed like hours. My roommate Barabra hadn't come back yet, so it was just me sitting there, thumping my foot on the ground and scratching my arm to feel somewhat in control of the situation. As the panic began to wind down, I heard a knock on the door. I froze. Barb wouldn't knock. She had no sense of privacy. I stood up in silence as I tried to remember where I had thrown my taser in my mania. Another knock on the door, less friendly than before. "Who are you?" I called out. "It's Jorge, miss. I'm the keeper." Jorge's voice replied back. It was full of sorrow and uneasiness. "I called the cops. They'll be here any second." I lied. "Please, miss, just open the door. The doc wants to talk to you. Clear the air, He clumsily tried to explain. "He can explain to the cops." "Miss, we both know you didn't call them," Jorge said plainly. "Otherwise, the doc would already be on the run. He almost ran, had me pack his go bag and everything. But he wants to stay, finish his work. He thinks you might be able to help." My heart burned at the prospect of helping that freak instead of laughing as the cops hauled him in. But I had that gut feeling again. Like the only way to catch him was to go with Jorge here. He had said it himself. He was on the verge of running anyway. I failed to save Jessica, even if this was all a cruel thing I had stumbled across. Wasn't it my duty to see it through now? After a moment, I unlocked the door and peeked my head out. There stood Jorge, a gruesome look on his face. I peeked my head out and glanced around. It seemed like he had come alone. Fine then, I have my head on my phone, 911 on speed dial. You guys try anything, it's over. Senorita, if the doc tries anything. Jorge started. I'll deal with him myself. He reached into his floral shirt and showed me a holstered pistole. I had that sinking feeling once more, but I just nodded my head and prepared to meet Dr. Fine. I'm relating this now so people know where I am, and if I don't come back, well, hopefully I come back. Maria's voice was the first thing I heard. It was faint at first, a whisper carried on the salty breeze as I stood at the dock in White Harbor, watching the ferry bring supplies for the tiny island I had decided to call home. At first I thought I imagined it. But the longer I stared at the weathered silhouette of the lighthouse rising from the barren rock offshore, the more certain I became of her presence. Come, Maria's voice called, soft and lilting, threading through the crash of waves and the distant cries of gulls. I shook my head as if the physical attempt would quiet my mind. She had been gone for nearly a year by then. That fact alone should have been enough to dismiss the whispering as a trick of my grieving mind, but it wasn't. I felt her as surely as I felt the sting of the sea air against my face. And though I would never admit it, not to the locals or even myself, her voice was the reason I bought the lighthouse. The agent selling it had called it a historic property, though in truth it was a crumbling ruin, a relic of the 19th century that had long outlived its usefulness. The light had gone out decades ago, and the mainlanders seemed content to let it rot. The townspeople in White Harbor didn't understand why anyone would want to live out there, on a barren rock where the wind howled and the waves hammered the cliffs with fury. The lighthouse was no longer needed in this day and age of satellite navigation. Hell, the lighthouse itself didn't even work as far as I knew. They didn't know the comfort I felt when I stared out at the lighthouse from the mainland, how the isolation called to me as much as Maria's voice. It's bad luck, an old fisherman warned me as I had finalized the paperwork at the harbor master's office. His skin was weathered as old driftwood, and his eyes were sharp beneath a furrowed brow. Lighthouse is cursed, always has been. You'd do well to stay on this side of the water. I thanked him and said nothing more. The truth was, I didn't care about curses or superstitions. I needed the solitude. My grief had become too unwieldy to carry in public, and after months of sympathy and sideways glances from coworkers and neighbors, I wanted nothing more than to be alone. The lighthouse offered that isolation in spades, perched on a barren island reachable only by boat. The lighthouse was weathered but standing, its tower leaning slightly against the battering of decades. The keeper's cottage, though small and in need of repair, was enough for my needs. The stones that made up the foundation were carved with faint, twisting patterns, spiky and deliberate. At first I thought they were merely decorative, though their thorn-like design seemed oddly purposeful. The first few days on the island were uneventful. I spent my time clearing out the keeper's cottage and making it livable, scrubbing mildew from the walls and patching the roof where it sagged. The work was exhausting, but I welcomed the distraction. At night, I would sit on the rocky shore and watch the moonlight ripple across the waves, feeling a strange sort of peace settle over me. I was sadly mistaken in my newfound attempts at a new life. The first dream came on my third night. In it, Maria stood on the edge of the cliffs, her dark hair whipped back by the wind. She didn't turn to look at me, but instead raised an arm and pointed toward the lighthouse. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear, and though her face was obscured, I felt her desperation, her urgency. When I woke, my throat was raw as though I'd been screaming. The dreams continued over the next week, each more vivid than the last. In one, Maria was walking along the beach, her footprints vanishing into the foam as she called my name. In another, she stood in the lighthouse tower, the shattered lens behind her casting refracted light across her face. During the day, I dismissed the dreams as manifestations of my grief, which was exactly why I wanted to escape here. But they left me restless, irritable, and plagued by a strange sense of unease I couldn't shake. The cottage seemed darker than it should have been, its corners shadowed even in full daylight. The wind carried faint whispers that I told myself were only the sounds of the sea. I found myself watching the tower constantly during the day when I was not working, the warmth of a cup of coffee lingering in my hand. Something about the lighthouse itself began to feel organic, alive in a way. The foundation stones were carved with strange, twisting patterns that I had dismissed as weathering when I first arrived. But the more I looked at them, the more deliberate they looked, like thorned vines curling into intricate shapes. some of which resembled faces or staring eyes. The carvings appeared elsewhere too, on the walls of the basement, around the frame of the spiral staircase leading to the lantern room. I told myself I was imagining things and swore at myself. I had made this choice for a new existence, one free of the grief that hung to me. This was my subconscious rebelling, giving me the finger, and I vowed to curse it right back. On my 9th day, while cleaning out the basement, I found a trapdoor. It was hidden beneath a rotted tarp, its iron ring rusted almost to dust. At first, I thought it was a storage hatch. With considerable physical effort, I pried it open. The cold, damp air that rose from below brought with it a smell I can only describe as ancient, earthy, salty, and faintly sweet, like fruit left to rot. As I stared into the darkness, I heard her voice again, and I froze. "Come to me," Maria whispered, her voice soft and pleading. I snapped the trapdoor shut and bolted it, my hands shaking. For hours I paced the cottage, arguing with myself. It was grief, I told myself, nothing more than my mind projecting what I wanted to hear. But her voice had felt so real, so immediate. If I could just go towards her. That night I barely slept. The dreams had changed. Maria no longer stood on the shore or in the tower. Instead, she was in the dark, surrounded by twisting, thorned vines. Her voice echoed in the blackness, a desperate plea that I couldn't ignore. The next day, trying desperately to think of anything else other than the trapdoor, I discovered a diary. I found it in a small room off the lighthouse's main staircase, tucked behind a stack of rotting wooden crates. Its leather cover was cracked and warped, and the pages were yellowed with age, but the writing inside was still legible, a hurried scrawl that spoke of the experiences of the previous occupant of this lighthouse. The dream started again, one entry read. At first I thought it was my son, returned to me from his loss at sea. But it's not, it's something else. The thorns were trying to tell me, but I didn't listen. God in heaven help me, I didn't listen. Another entry read, "The light is failing. I can feel the hum of it weakening. When it goes out, what will happen? Will the eyes open? Will it be me that opens them? The light could be so blinding, couldn't it?" The entries grew more erratic, the handwriting shakier and less coherent until they ended abruptly. When I bought this lighthouse, there was no mention of what happened to the writer, but I didn't need it spelled out. I spent the next few days trying to convince myself that the diary was the product of a disturbed mind here alone. I was stronger, better, smarter, I must be. No matter how much I tried to rationalize it, though, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Shadows seemed to move at the edges of my vision, and the hum of the wind carried a resonance that set my teeth on edge. But as I lay in bed that night, Maria's voice returned, stronger than ever. "Come to me," she whispered. Her voice was so close, so warm, that for a moment I thought she was standing by my bed. The next morning I woke to find that I'd been sleepwalking. My feet were caked with dirt and salt, and there was a faint, lingering smell of damp earth that clung to my skin. My memories of the night before were fragmented, dreamlike visions of thorned vines twisting around the lighthouse walls, Maria's voice calling me downward. I had enough. This failed venture to escape my pain had clearly failed. I was now becoming delusional. I left the island that day, determined to leave the dreams and whispers behind. For a few days I thought it had worked. I had stayed in a hotel in the town, and the whispers of Maria on the ocean breeze were distant. But the visions followed me. I could see Maria standing in the distance wherever I went, on the shore or in the crowded streets of the mainland. Even in the silence of my rented room, I could see her. I could see her. Don't you get it? I saw her as clearly as you read this text. "Come back," she whispered. "I need you." The dreams grew worse, more vivid and consuming. In them I saw a chamber beneath the lighthouse, a vast circular room lined with glowing thorned carvings that writhed like living things. At the center was a pedestal, and on it lay a book bound in dark leather that seemed to glisten like oil. I returned to the island. There was no peace away from it. There was no peace on it. I was trapped. I needed to know what was real, as I had lost all sense of reality. Upon reaching the island, I rushed to the damp basement and flung the trapdoor open. What greeted me were stone stairs that descended into pitch blackness. I grabbed a flashlight and plunged into the unknown. The stairs spiraled deep into the earth, far deeper than the lighthouse's foundation should have allowed. I walked for at least 30 minutes without stop, and the stairs just kept going. An echo of Maria's voice bouncing through the stairwell kept me moving forward. The walls were smooth stone, damp and etched with more of the thorn-like carvings. These were larger and more detailed the longer I descended, twisting around crude shapes that looked like eyes peering deep into my very being. When I reached the end of the staircase, my feet hit wet sand. I looked up to see a circular chamber. The air was thick, pressing against my skin like an invisible weight. The thorns on the walls glowed faintly, their light pulsing. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it lay a book, its surface glistening. The thorns etched into the pedestal were thicker and more intricate than the others I had seen, forming a barrier around the book that seemed to keep me away. But as I approached, I heard Maria's voice in the room. I searched everywhere but saw nothing. The words echoed and reverberated. The sound caused the thorns to recede, curling back like vines burned by invisible fire. When I touched the book, it creaked open, and the air in the chamber grew heavier, pressing against my chest like the weight of an ocean. The words inside were written in a script I couldn't read, yet I understood them perfectly. They spoke of a great series of ever-watching eyes through the cosmos. It is watching. It is searching. It was eternal. It needed help. I turned to see Maria standing beside me. I swear to you now we touched and it was real. But her skin was not the warmth of life I knew. It was cold and wet as the depths of the sea that carried her voice. Maria's voice called to me as she looked into my eyes, soft and pleading. "You can bring me back," she whispered. "You can free me, just help me out of here." The thorns in the room recoiled and wilted, leading to the staircase I had just descended. "Help me," she pleaded. My hand hovered over the face. The skin felt rough and wet to my touch as my eyes told me it was my love. "You're dead, you can't be here." She cocked her head as if confused. "I'm here right before you, take me with you. Take this book with you and help me escape. You've heard me, you know me, you see me." I stumbled backwards into one of the thorn bushes. I caught myself on one of the branches, causing blood to gush from my hand. I looked away from Maria to see blood drip down, and when I returned my view to her, I saw only a humanoid mass of sand standing by the pedestal. The illusion shattered, it leapt for me. We struggled on the ground. The sand mass, having strength unknown to me, tossed me across the ground with ease. I tried to fight, but each blow was absorbed by the watery earth. The faceless thing spoke to me. "The eyes must open, you will release me." The voice was no longer hers. It was layered, distorted, and filled with a cold malice. Thrown on the ground again, I reached for something, anything to fight back with. I grimaced in pain as I broke off a branch of nearby thorns, my blood spraying on the ground. I swung wildly at the sand form, and it scattered on at contact with the branch. I ran. I ran back up the stone staircase as fast my legs would take me. The voice of Maria called to me, pleading with me to return. I don't know how long it took when I burst through the trap-door hatch. I threw everything around on top of it. Boxes, furniture, crates, anything. The thudding from below was relentless. I thought back to the journal, the light. The light was out. The light had to shine again. I ascended the lighthouse as sweat fell on the stairs while I passed. I spent hours repairing it, using spare parts from the basement. The thudding of the trapdoor grew louder as I worked, a deep, resonant frequency that made my skull ache. By the time I finished, it was night. The sea was black, the horizon blurred by mist. When I lit the lantern, the light pierced the darkness like a blade. The thudding of the trapdoor stopped, and for a moment the world was still. But then I heard Maria again. I turned to see her standing at the top of the lighthouse with me. "You cannot stop this," she whispered. Her voice was no longer hers. It was layered, 1,000 voices speaking in unison. "The light is only a delay. You called to me and I came. The breach is open and you opened it." "What the hell are you?" I yelled in fury. The form of Maria stood before me was distorted. Her limbs were long and her body stretched and unnatural. Everything and nothing. "You comprehend but a fraction of your reality. Your mind is simply the gateway upon which I travel. You are ephemeral. I am eternal. I see all. I see you." I turned to the repaired light. "This isn't real. None of this is real." Maria smiled wide, longer than a human smile should, and then faded into the mist of the sea. After hours, I made my way down to where the trapdoor lay in the basement. Piles of boxes and furniture covered the area where I threw them. I waited for any movement, but none came. I pushed the refuse aside, and there was nothing. I searched, and there was nothing. No trapdoor could be found. I searched the lighthouse in vain, and there was nothing. I ripped the lighthouse apart, and no trace of the trapdoor could be found. Had I imagined it all? I looked down at my hands. They were bandaged and bloodied. It had to have happened. It must have. Or did I just cut myself? No, I assured myself. I saved myself, I saved everyone. I sit here now writing this, staring out at the sea, listening to the waves crash on the small shore. It's been weeks and there is still nothing. No Maria, no trapdoor, nothing. I write this as much as a confession of my mania and uncertainty as I do as a warning. I'm certain I cannot leave now, not ever. If I falter, if I let the light go out, even for a moment, the eyes will open. They've seen me. I felt it. I am seen, and I cannot be free. I used to love exploring abandoned places. The thrill of venturing into the unknown, searching for lost relics of the past, and the stories we could tell afterward made it all worth the occasional bumps and bruises. My friends and I, Josh, Tyler, and myself, Andrew, made it a habit. We were young, reckless, and thought we were untouchable. That all changed the night we met that demon, who I later learned was Phoebe. It was a crumbling carnival on the edge of town, the kind of place you'd think would only exist in urban legends. The air was thick with decay, and the distant creak of rusted rides made the silence feel alive. The place was unsettling, but that's what we loved. We thought we'd find old prizes or maybe a creepy clown prop to take home as a trophy. We had no idea the nightmare that was waiting for us. We first saw him in the funhouse, Phoebe. At first he didn't move. He looked like a colorful mannequin standing at the far end of the mirror maze. His oversized clown clothes tattered and caked with grime. His head, a polka-dotted ball, was too perfect, too smooth. No eyes, no features, just a mouth that stretched unnaturally wide. That thing's gotta be part of the carnival, Tyler whispered. But none of us moved closer. Something about him felt wrong. His presence was suffocating, even from a distance. Then Phoebe tilted his head. Josh, the bravest, or maybe the dumbest of us, laughed nervously. "It's just a prop, you guys. Watch this." He stepped toward the clown, and that's when it happened. Josh froze mid-step, his expression twisted into shock. "Something's," he started to say, but then he screamed. We looked down and saw it. A hand, pale and elastic, had reached out from Phoebe's body and wrapped around Josh's ankle. The fingers were impossibly long, almost serpentine, and they began retracting, dragging Josh closer. "Help me," Josh yelled, clawing at the ground, but we were too terrified to move. Phoebe's hand pulled him closer until Josh was face to face with that grinning mouth. What happened next? It shouldn't be real. Phoebe grabbed Josh's face and ripped it clean off, peeling it like paper. He stuffed it into his mouth, chewing methodically as Josh's screams turned to choking gasps. Then Phoebe's hands blurred with inhuman speed. He stabbed Josh's eyelids with a blade that seemed to materialize from nowhere, tore off his nose, and plunged his fingers into Josh's abdomen. We stood frozen, watching in horror as Phoebe pulled out Josh's intestines and began eating them, his head tilting with a grotesque curiosity. Blood pooled around him, the metallic smell making me gag. "Run!" Tyler finally screamed, breaking the spell. We bolted, leaving Josh behind. We didn't look back, not even when his screams stopped. That was 25 years ago. Not a day goes by that I don't hear Josh's screams in my nightmares. Tyler and I tried to move on, tried to pretend that what we saw was some twisted hallucination brought on by fear. But we knew the truth. Phoebe was real. I thought I'd escaped him. I thought if I stayed away from places like that carnival, he'd leave me alone. I was wrong. A month ago, I started feeling like I was being watched. Shadows felt darker. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I thought I saw something just out of sight. A colorful blur, a polka-dotted ball. I told myself it was paranoia. Then, last week, Tyler disappeared. His wife called me frantic, saying he never came home from work. A few days later, they found his body in a park. His face was gone, his abdomen ripped open. I knew it was Phoebe. Last night, my world shattered. I woke up to find the bed empty. My wife, Emma, wasn't beside me. I heard something in the living room and went to check. She was there. At first, I didn't recognize her. Her body was twisted and mutilated, her face and abdomen torn away. Her flesh was flayed, muscles twitching as though Phoebe had turned her into a grotesque puppet. And there he was. Phoebe stood in the corner watching me, his head tilted in that same curious way, his bloodied mouth stretched into a grin. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. He spoke, his voice a guttural, mocking whisper. "I won't harm you, Andrew. That would be too easy. I want to see you suffer." Then he was gone. I haven't slept since. I don't know how to escape him. I see him everywhere now, lurking in the shadows, waiting. I know he'll come back. He won't kill me, he promised that, but he'll take everything I love, piece by piece. If you ever see a clown with a polka-dotted ball for a head, run. Don't stop. Don't look back. Because if Phoebe finds you, he won't stop until he's torn your life apart. The passenger I'd been driving for hours. Way too many hours. The road stretched out in front of me like a black ribbon, twisting through the rural stretches of western Pennsylvania. My phone had lost service a while ago, and I didn't have anything downloaded to listen to. Just me, the muttering of the engine, and the dark, empty road. It was late, well past midnight, and my eyelids were getting heavy. It was that kind of tired when you begin treating yourself to an extra long blink every now and then. Once my head bobbed off my chest, I knew I had to call it. I needed to stop just for a little while. I felt like I was made of stone, pressing down into the upholstery of the seat. Up ahead, I spotted a small pull-off, a narrow dirt cutout on the side of the road where the forest opened up just enough to park. I pulled off the road and eased into the niche. The car was suddenly nestled in a little covert of trees. The woods were thick here, pressing in on three sides like walls of black. Tired as I was, it felt all the more cozy. In other circumstances, it might have struck me as a little menacing. I turned off the car, fumbled for the door lock button in the dark, and almost immediately began to doze off. The only sound was the skittering of leaves as they stumbled by along the tree line, but even that was barely a whisper. My limbs felt heavy, my tailbone aching from hours behind the wheel. I'll just rest for a bit, I thought. Maybe just close my eyes for 20 minutes before getting back on the road. I reclined my seat halfway and let the weight of exhaustion take me, my eyes fluttering shut. I don't know how long I was out, could have been minutes, maybe much longer. But something pulled me awake. I opened my eyes slowly, my mind still foggy with sleep. I cleared my throat and tried to stretch as much as I could in the cramped space. I pressed the power seat button to return to an upright position. I buckled my seatbelt and glanced in the rearview mirror out of habit. A pair of dark eyes looked back at me. My body went rigid. Holding my breath, I blinked hard and opened my eyes again. They were still there. A man in a black suit was sitting in the back seat, perfectly still, his eyes locked on mine through the reflection in the mirror. My chest constricted, the air in the car suddenly feeling thick and suffocating. Maybe I was still half dreaming, caught in that semi-conscious space between sleep and waking that Poe wrote about in the story with that poor guy in the torture pit. He was there, sitting bolt upright with his hands folded neatly in his lap, as if he'd been waiting politely for me to wake up. His face was pale, even waxy in the moonlight filtering through the trees. And his eyes? There was something wrong with his eyes. They were too dark, too hollow, like twin black pits that seemed to swallow the scant light that reached them. I made a sudden lunge to get out of the car. Lurching sideways and grabbing the door handle, I was choked back by my seatbelt slipping up across my neck. Before I could make another move, a hand reached from the back seat and rested softly on my shoulder. I understood I was being told to stay put. I glanced at the door locks. They were down. The windows hadn't been touched either. I noticed that the windshield and windows in the front were fogged up, probably from my body heat and breath. But the rear windows beside him were clear. I was forced to finally gasp and suck in a breath. The silence broken. The man seemed compelled to speak. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice low and sanitized. I tried to speak, but my throat felt like it was closing up, and all that came out was a dry, raspy whisper. Who are you? Why are you in this car?" He didn't answer. He just kept staring at me, his face empty of any discernible emotion. Slowly he leaned forward, and I could see him more clearly in the mirror now. His suit was pristine, not a wrinkle on it, but his skin. There was something unnatural about his skin. It was too tight, too thin, like it had been stretched over his bones. The waxy sheen remained. I thought I saw a bluish hue pushing through the flesh around his cheekbones. I tried to reach for the ignition, but my hand was shaking so badly I could barely grip the key. As I fumbled, the man in the back seat spoke again, this time a little louder but in a mockingly soothing tone. "This was a bad place for you to stop." My fingers finally found the key, and I turned it, but nothing happened. The engine wouldn't start. I tried again, twisting the key harder, desperation creeping into my movements. But the car remained dead, the dashboard lights flickering weakly before fading back into darkness. He continued, "Well, bad for you, good for us." The man's reflection smiled then, a slow, aching, lunatic smile. His teeth scared me more than anything else. They were sharp, all of them. Had he sharpened his teeth? Was he human? I could feel my breath coming in short, panicked gasps now. If I got out of the car now, my only option would be running. Running where? Into the woods? Were those his woods? No matter. I was frozen, unable to look away from that awful, empty gaze in the mirror. "I can imagine you're wondering what I want." His voice now a soft hiss. He was leaning closer, his breath cold against my skin. It felt like an anesthetic was being sprayed across the back of my neck. I said nothing. He continued, "Not so much. I only need one." Not bothering to try to understand what this meant, I clicked the seatbelt open. I was sure he'd heard it. Knowing I had seconds at most to act, I forced my hand to the door handle and yanked it open, tumbling out of the car. I flopped clumsily onto the dirt, earth and leaves sticking to my clothes as I scrambled to my feet. My legs felt like jelly, but I ran as fast as I could into the dark and trees. Branches scratched at my face and arms, and the ground was uneven beneath my feet, but I kept running, the sound of my own labored breathing echoing in my ears. I finally collapsed against a tree, gasping for air, my heart pounding. From here I could see the road below and the ravine that fell away from the highway beyond. I glanced toward my car, expecting to see him standing there beside it, looking right at me. But there was no one. The driver's side door was still swung open. With the dome light on, I could see that the car was empty now. For a long moment I just stood there, staring, trying to convince myself it had all been some kind of hallucination brought on by exhaustion. I was almost ready to venture closer to the car. It's not like I had much choice. I had no idea where I was, but I knew I was miles from civilization. If I was going to flag someone down for help, I'd need to be on the road anyway. I stood from my crouched position. In that moment, his voice cut through the night and struck me in the chest so forcefully I think I staggered. "I told you I only need one." The voice echoed through the woods, cutting through the air like a knife. I spun around, scanning the darkness, but there was nothing. Just the dense trees and the suffocating silence of the forest. My pulse was roaring in my ears, and every instinct screamed at me to keep running, to get as far away from the car, from him as I could. Once his voice had faded, the woods fell silent. I remained still, waiting for something to happen. I didn't hear any footsteps, no rustling leaves, no sign of movement from the road. But I could feel it. He was close, watching, waiting. I had no choice but to move. Slowly I started backing away, my legs trembling with exhaustion and fear. My eyes darted around, straining to see through the darkness. I would have to travel on foot in the opposite direction until I felt like I'd shaken him. That's when I heard my car start. Panic shot through me. I broke into a run, pushing my way back through the trees. The sound of the engine sputtering to life, and I heard the tires crunch against the dirt as the car started to move. Was this all some overdone, creepy carjacking? When I reached the edge of the woods, 20 yards from my car, I paused and looked ahead. He was sitting in the driver's seat. His dead, hollow eyes met mine through the windshield. I heard the car shift into gear, and he slowly pulled the car onto the road. The headlights illuminated the empty highway ahead of him. He didn't speed away. Instead, he eased into the lane, rolling down the road at a crawling pace. He looked toward me one more time and then turned off the headlights. I watched in horror as the car picked up speed. It veered into the other lane. Headlights appeared in the distance, faint at first, then growing brighter as a truck approached. No, I muttered, barely able to catch my breath. My legs felt like lead as I stumbled forward, helplessly watching the nightmare unfold. The car was now entirely in the wrong lane, accelerating toward the oncoming truck. The truck's horn blared, a deafening wail that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. My car only barreled ahead, picking up speed. Though I couldn't see him, I knew that eerie, unnatural smile was plastered on his face. There was no time. The truck driver swerved, tires screeching, but the road was too narrow, the margin for error too small. I braced myself, as if I could feel the impending impact even from where I stood. The collision was violent. Metal crunched against metal, the sound echoing through the trees like a thunderclap. The truck jackknifed, its back end swinging wildly before smashing into the guardrail that ran between the road and a deep ravine. My car, a mangled heap, spun off the road and slammed into the trees. For a moment, everything was still. Then an enormous metallic groan emanated from the truck, or more likely the guardrail it had smashed. I watched, frozen in abject horror, as the guardrail gave way and the truck cab slid ceaselessly toward the edge of a ravine. I was rooted to the spot, unable to move, my body frozen in shock. I should have run for the truck and the driver inside. I should have screamed for help. None of that would have helped, but anything would have been more admirable than standing dumbly as that poor man plummeted to his death. The truck cab disappeared from view without a sound. For an instant I wondered if it had actually fallen. Then a massive explosion shook the trees. Soon the glow of flames colored the tree canopy from below. My eyes were drawn back to the road. From the wrecked car, something was moving. A figure emerged from the driver's side, stepping out of the twisted remains of my vehicle as if nothing had happened. The man, unharmed, his suit still immaculate, turned to face me. His cold, dark eyes locked onto mine. Standing in a pool of moonlight beside the wreck, he raised his hand and held up one finger. He shook it once for emphasis. Only one, I thought, understanding all at once. He'd taken the trucker in my place. He turned and stalked confidently into the woods, swallowed by the darkness. I stood there, trembling, the biting smell of burning fuel clinging to the air, the distant orange glow of flames flickering in the ravine. The forest was eerily silent, as though nature itself had recoiled at the horror that had just unfolded. It was my fault. I should never have stopped on that lonely, dark road. I should have stayed awake, pushed through the exhaustion. Instead, I'd let my guard down and let that thing into my car. Among all the things I might have done differently that night, one haunts me to this day. "I only need one," it said.
you.